Remind members to switch off mobile phones and electronic devices.
My phone's just rang. Can I answer it?
Oh, we're in a meeting now.
That's his girlfriend.
There's something in these scones, is there?
Just the plain ones.
Okay, can we move then quickly to apologies? Any apologies? No, don't think so.
What's time Chairman?
Have we an apology? No.
Sidney Anderson said that he possibly may not be here, but if the meeting is on while he arrives.
All right, that's okay. That's grand. Okay. No further apologies then. Now, agenda item number 2, declaration of interest. Just to remind members that under standing orders, quote, before taking part in any debate or proceedings of the Assembly or its committees, a member shall declare any interest, financial or otherwise, which is relevant to that debate or proceedings where such interest is held by the member or an immediate relative, unquote. And to inform members, it's appropriate to remind you that of this from time to time in case a member may have new interests which have yet to be declared to the committee, and to ask members if there are any further interests to declare. If there are, perhaps they would notify the clerk, if there are. Draft minutes, which is agenda item number 3. These are the minutes of the meeting held on the 30th of January, and they're included at page 6. So if members are content with the accuracy and content of the minutes, agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Agenda item number 4, there aren't any further papers for this item. Then move on to another issue, the Consumer Council oral briefing or review of Hansard. What we have tabled is an excerpt from Hansard of last week's oral briefing by the Consumer Council. It was agreed at last week's meeting that members would review Hansard in relation to the comments by a member.
Sorry.
Right, no, on this one. Now, I've looked through this myself. I don't
What
see
page are you on, Patsy?
Pardon?
What page are you on?
It's tabled.
Table. I don't know.
Matters arise.
110 pages in the table papers. What page is it?
Okay. Now, what am I seeing here? Just give us that. Just to be tabled, anyway.
Trick question, I think.
I don't know.
Move on.
Anyway. Now,
Keep the card. Default.
right, where are those? Hey there. Anyway, I think, having reviewed the Hansard myself, unless anybody has anything particular to add to it, yes, it was during the normal discourse of normal political exchange, and I didn't see anything particularly contentious in it. And I know, Sammy, you had raised the issue at the time. Reviewed it myself, looked at it myself, read the Hansard. I would rate it as normal political banter, but if you had anything further to add about that.
Well, I suppose I would say that I didn't feel that the comment was relevant to the discussion with the Consumer Council. But if you're saying that you're happy enough with it, I'm happy enough to leave there. But I also said as well that I think we as a committee are working well, so that to quote the Bible, it's a little fox to spoil the vine, and sometimes these things can agitate people. So, but if there are things I'm happy enough to raise it, and hopefully other members will raise stuff like that as well.
That's grand. Thanks for that, Sam. Now we can have that copy of Hansard. It should have been in table papers here today, and it's not. But anyway, I've reviewed it myself, so if members want to look at it later on in the meeting, we can look at it. But I accept what you say, and thank you for that, Sammy. Thank you. Now, the next item is item number 5, which is the oral briefing from the Northern Ireland Chamber of Commerce on Northern Ireland's export base, and these papers are definitely included at page 13 and include the clerk's brief, Invest NI statistics, and the Northern Ireland Chamber quarterly economic survey. Now, we have again tabled the briefing paper and a copy of the presentation by the Northern Ireland Chamber of Commerce, and I realise those were received by us fairly late on, so members can maybe take a quick scrutiny of those. They arrived yesterday evening. Nothing in particular to do with us, but if members wish to, they can peruse through that before we have the presentations. And briefing the committee today are Mr. Mark Nutter, President of the Chamber of Commerce, Anne McGregor, Chief Executive of the Chamber of Commerce, Maureen O'Reilly, an independent economist, and Richard Bell, Managing Director of Solmatrix. So you're all very welcome. If you want to come forward to the table, please. You're all very welcome, and thank you for being with us. And could I just extend on the committee's behalf our thanks to you for your ongoing engagement with us and making sure that via email and others that we're fully briefed as to what the contemporary issues are, including changes in the market. We have with us here the quarterly economic survey, which indeed it shows small progress, but at least it's heartening progress going in the right direction in key sectors of the economy. So that's good to hear, and it does reflect the experience that some of us are having on the ground in our constituents as we see things start to slowly stabilise and move gradually, incrementally upwards. So thank you for being with us. You have been told of what the format is. We have up to 10 minutes to make your opening remarks, your opening comments, and then we'll have a Q&A session from the members. So I don't know which of the two you as yourself, Mark.
I'm going to introduce the team very briefly, Mr. Chairman, and then I'm going to ask Anne McGregor to make the 10-minute presentation, if I may.
Okay.
So yes, I'm Mark Nodder, and I have the honour of being the President of the Chamber of Commerce for the last 2 years. I guess more importantly, as regards the context of today's discussion, I'm also Group Managing Director of Wrightbus, so hopefully I can speak with some authority about a company that is striving to increase its presence in export markets. I'd like to introduce to my left Maureen O'Reilly, who's an independent economist and who has carried out a number of engagements for the Chamber of Commerce and really advises us on matters of the economy. Anne McGregor, who is our full-time Chief Executive in the Chamber of Commerce, and Richard Bell, who is a local entrepreneur. He is a founder and Chief Executive of Solmatrix Renewables Company, and again can speak with some authority about growing a business in Northern Ireland and facing the prospect now of entering the export arena. So I'll pass to Anne to talk about the Chamber's role.
Thank you. I'm just going to outline a little bit about Northern Ireland Chamber, tell you about our Growing Something Brilliant campaign, what we believe is the export challenge and our view on how you should address it. I wanted to tell you about Northern Ireland Chamber so that you can see that we're an organisation that's a long history. We've been established since 1783. We've been involved in economic development since that time. Our members are corporates, SMEs and micro businesses from across Northern Ireland. We have very few retailers, just one or two retailers, so it's those businesses out there producing products and services. Our role is to enable businesses to grow locally and internationally and drive the development of the economy. And we're actually committed to a private sector global network that's cohesive and working alongside government to grow export. That would be our primary objective. We have a team of 15 staff, and we're funded 100% by our members, Marks and Richard, people like that, with no government funding. We're accredited to the British Chamber of Commerce Network, the British Irish Chamber of Commerce Network and the All Ireland Chamber Network, and through that we're linked to the worldwide network of chambers. And we have all our quality standards and services that you expected, like ISO, etc. And whilst we're part of these networks, we have to make very clear we're independent. We have our own independent board and have the ability to talk about policy for Northern Ireland only and support businesses in Northern Ireland or the island only. We're not behest of other, London strategies. We have a portfolio of services that help our members increase their brand, their networks, and learn from others and grow their businesses. But mainly, we're part of that whole continuum of export support. In fact, we're the only private sector business organisation that have developed a portfolio of products and services. And we try to inspire businesses to grow because there's many barriers mentally for small businesses to actually take that big step and grow. And we do that through our Growing Something Brilliant campaign. And we have a range of support programme, including an online piece called Export Britain. We have a Danske Bank Export First programme, and through that programme we've helped 280 companies so far. We have Gateways to Growth, which is cross-border. 270 companies have been supported that. That's Meet the Buyers. And we do export documentation to help people get products through customs and services. And there's 10,000 documents so far go out every year. We also help individual businesses do connections internationally. So if a company like Richard is perhaps heading out after a trade mission to a country, we can link him with the chambers in that area and get him a soft landing or friendly face when he gets there. But we do all of that because we believe this growing Northern Ireland export base is vital, because we all know that it helps us build skills, build the regional economy, and also it can help with foreign direct investment if you have a good supply base of small business there. But mostly too, we want to reduce our dependency in the public sector and in inward investment. All of those are very, very important, but we think the SME base is equally important. Unfortunately, that base is very small in Northern Ireland. We have the smallest private sector employment base across the regions. The UK region is only 2.3. We have a much smaller share of large firms, 24% versus 41% in the rest of the UK. And we have the lowest business birth rate in the UK regions. In fact, it's actually declining. We now only have 113,000 businesses that went down 1,000. But even in the boom years, when things were going well and small businesses were growing, we grew on the basis of self-employment. So we had about 36,000 one-man bands in that area, which all presents challenges. And that leads to a correspondingly low export base. And Northern Ireland accounts for only 2% of UK's export. And GB is our single biggest market, making up 48% of sales, with exports accounting for 31% of manufacturing sales. And we're relying on a very small number of trading partners, such as Ireland, the US, Canada, for the majority of exports. Ireland is a particularly important trade partner for Northern Ireland. And sales in 2010 and 11 were 5.7 billion. 2012 and 13, they've now gone down to 5.56 billion. Although there has been some gains in some markets, there's declines in other markets. More concerning is we're heavily dependent on a number of very small exporters. A small number of exporters, not very small. We've only 10 companies do 50% of our exports. In Scotland, it's about 60 companies do 50% of the exports. Large firms, and this is why they're very important to us, they account for 70% of exports, and foreign direct investment, which we're very supportive of, accounts for 75% of exports. So really, it's a big business game, not enough small businesses in there. In total, we have only 1,500 goods exporters. We're not sure how many service exporters we have because the data is not available, and that's less than 3% of the business base. So it's a major challenge. SMEs typically are the backbone of any national or economy, to grow. And a problem which characterises SMEs in Northern Ireland is the absence of a relative dynamic middle strand of enterprises. And that probably goes back to that 36,000 one-man bands. And we need more of those businesses, more businesses like Richard's that have high skill that are targeting the export market. They're not necessarily a big business, but they have the skill to go into export. And there's opportunities there in food and agri and engineering. Okay, I'm nearly there. All of that is severely challenged in the Programme for Government Export Target, which is to achieve long-term economic growth by improving competitiveness and an export-driven private sector. And the target is to increase the value of manufacturing exports by 20% over a 4-year period. And in fact, they've decreased by 1.2% between 2011 and 2012. So we're obviously not going to make that target. We did commission research through Maureen O'Reilly, through our British Chamber network, and through our own surveys. We did that through a quarterly economic survey, which has about 500 responses every quarter from business. At our conference on Growing Something Brilliant, where we had 500 attendees, and also we have an export forum and ongoing discussions. Now, as you would expect, individual businesses will talk about their individual experiences, and the issues, they'll highlight their particular issues. And so for potential exporters, talk about finding and understanding markets overseas, the fact that their business is too small, that they have finance requirements, or they don't have the right skills. Existing exporters will say slightly similar things. They might have more experienced staff, but there's still a lot of export costs, logistics, inadequate market intelligence. But nothing of that compares. We've known this for some time. I could have written those results to you 5 years ago or 10 years ago and 2 weeks ago. It seems to keep coming. But we actually, that leads us to ask the question, is Northern Ireland's export framework fit for purpose? Export support is provided by a lot of organisations, including the Chamber, Invest NI, Intertrade, Dell, enterprise agencies, and now, through councils, and we have online support. But it's fragmented and programme-driven rather than needs-driven, and navigating that support system is a major challenge for business. And we have no explicit support for potential exporters in Northern Ireland, whereas in Enterprise Ireland, they have a dedicated export-ready division. What I'm saying to you is, you have heard this before. The Invest NI chief executive noted that more needs to be done to boost exports, and even there's been a recent criticism by a public accounts committee in the UK around the whole support to export, and more needs to be done. And we say, we would love you to. The economic strategy says that you prioritise export growth, but is that really enough? And the scale of the export challenge is fairly significant, and it needs to be recognised. And we would ask government to lead on the development of an explicit export strategy or action plan. I know we don't want strategies, really, action plan for Northern Ireland, which includes a review of the export data sources to assess the true extent of Northern Ireland exporting, a review of the support system, and an assessment of businesses' capability and growth. I'm on my last slide now. And we think that strategy should include an action plan that delivers for business no matter what stage they're at their export journey. It's consistent across all parts of Northern Ireland, because it isn't at this stage. It also recognises that every business seeking to export has different requirements, and that the system requires flexibility, and recognises the role of a number of partners, including the private sector. We're all operating in silos, and it's not helping Northern Ireland PLC. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Aaron. We'll move then to Mr. Flanagan. Phil.
Thanks, Patsy, and thanks for the presentation. The first question I'd ask is how big of an impact is the current perception of political instability for your members?
Let me take that one. It's very significant. And we were consulted, had an hour or so's conversation with Dr. Haas when he was over, and we made it clear the impact to businesses during the whole period of the parades, flags issue. But when you're trying to make a mark on the other side of the world as a potential exporter, and you're trying to establish your credentials for the first time, a potential customer wants to know not just about your products, not just about you as a person or a company. They want to know where you come from, and do you have stability? And if we enter into a long-term relationship with you, is that going to be secure? Is there anything that might threaten that? If I order 100 buses, will they arrive on time, or will there be disruption at the ports that would prevent that kind of thing? So, as someone who's spent the last 26, 27 years selling stuff out of Northern Ireland to foreign customers, it doesn't make it any easier. And we all believe that there's unfinished business here. And obviously we urge everyone who's involved and can have influence to bear to press on, because we do need that stability. We don't want Northern Ireland internationally to be known for the wrong things. We want to be known for the right things, for our ability to innovate, for the excellence of our companies and our products. And we don't want to have that stigma, if that answers your question.
And what is the perception overseas?
I think it's mixed, Phil. I think there are times when CNN and Sky News carry all the wrong pictures about Northern Ireland, and I suspect, it passes. It's not a permanent stain, but it's there. It's something our competitors don't necessarily have to explain away. So we'd rather we didn't have to.
Okay, and as political leaders, what would you like us to do to resolve that?
You need to keep talking. there are inevitably going to be compromises. You absolutely have to work through this.
Moving on to the issue of energy costs, I was with a manufacturing business in Lurgan yesterday that operates several sites and got a very good insight into the challenges facing a business that really doesn't have many competitors here. That's competing with businesses around Europe. How big of an impact are energy prices impacting on large energy users and the ability of locally based companies to export and compete with other businesses?
I'll just make a remark and then I'm going to ask Richard actually to develop this. But big companies like ourselves, Michelin, Bombardier, others are obviously very significant consumers of energy. It is our perception that we are not in a competitive position. And that's an on-cost that is a disadvantage when we compare ourselves to GB and if you like, mainland Europe competitors. But Richard, do you want to maybe say something on that?
Mr. Chairman and Committee, just what I would say is that we operate in the micro-generation sector, photovoltaics particularly for small businesses mainly and households as well. The issue is uncertainty about where it's going more than the actual cost today. That's uppermost in their mind. The cost today is certainly making them uncompetitive, but the issue is one moment you get you see things issued from the grid operator NIE to say that the grid is not capable of taking various sources of energy, and then the next thing you hear about gas implementation, and then the next thing you hear about fracking, and it's the uncertainty that is the bigger issue actually in the marketplace than the actual price at this point. The uncertainty of where it's going from here forward.
Okay, and in terms of, you've mentioned a number of large organisations. There are some of them that have announced plans to come off the grid and generate their own energy. So some of those companies will get a very quick payback period on their initial capital investment. Are there many of your members actively considering that approach?
Yeah, absolutely. There are lots of people that are considering at this time supplementing their grid connection with own generation and various generation means, wind turbines, photovoltaics, even diesel generation and other forms of generation. So they are absolutely looking at that at the moment, and the payback is good, and it's a very natural step. The thing that does for them is that it allows them to predict into the future what their energy bill is likely to be, and that's the single most important thing. When they're looking forward 4, 5, 6, 10 years for an investment, they want to be able to say that we have capped our energy costs in a predictable fashion.
It's not a question we specifically asked, but we could ask it actually through our surveys.
There's a narrative being painted by the regulator and sometimes by the department that energy prices are going to continue rising and rising. Is that something that you accept, or do you think there is an alternative?
I don't think we can accept it. If it means more choice, if it means more alternatives being made available to us, I'd love to be in a position where, you know, if we had our factories over in GB, we would probably have 6 or 8 places we could go to for a choice of energy supply. We're pretty limited here. Yeah, we'd like a more competitive environment. If you're manufacturing in particular on the island, you are on an island. So you're importing a lot of your raw materials to begin with. You're actually facing transportation costs that, say, the European competitors don't have. So before you even start cutting metal and bolting together, there are certain costs that you're having to bear, which can render you at a competitive disadvantage. So what you don't want is to go shooting yourself in the foot and add on even more costs that you really should be regulating and managing to keep us competitive.
Thanks, Butson.
Okay, thanks, Phil.
Okay, thank you,
Mr.
Chair.
Free, Paul.
Just to stay on the energy costs issue, because not least in Northumberland was a stark issue, and not least for Wrightbus and other companies, large employers like JTI manufacturers and Michelin. Energy costs, and you talk about the choice being limited. The announcement today that the utility regulator was opening up the consultation on gas to the west, how vital is that for our companies west of the Bann?
I think, Paul, we welcome anything, frankly, that gives us a more competitive arena and gives companies choice. And nobody wants to be limited to a monopolistic or a semi-monopolistic situation when they're trying to negotiate good prices for the supply of anything, including energy. So this is probably a move in the right direction.
Has the Chamber got a view on the fracking debate?
No, we haven't developed that. No, we don't.
Is it something you hope to explore in the future, or are you staying well alone?
Our primary goal as a business organisation is to help businesses grow and trade internationally. So all our main focus is on export and export development, and that's why we're here today. But we are interested in cost to businesses, such as and corporation tax and skills, etc. But fracking has not come on our agenda at this stage.
With regards to the question that Phil asked about renewable energy on businesses, taking forward their own projects in order to alleviate some of the costs and the pressures on them. Some of these companies, as you say, the foreign direct investment companies account for 75% of the exports. Largest companies, 250 plus employees, account for 70% of the exports. We understand the 10 big companies you talk about are very, very important, vitally important for us. But if those 10 companies were to go out and do their own thing with regards to renewable energy schemes, it could put a burden on the rest of the companies on the electric grid. Is that something you've thought about? Some of these companies will have no choice because they're competing in a global market with not only competitors but other plants within their company.
No, I mean, I think it's fair to say we don't have an energy strategy per se within the Chamber. As Anne says, we look really to promote the sort of collective interests of our members, 1,200 member organisations, and I think the most significant challenge they face at the moment is expanding their market horizons, and our biggest thrust really is to do what we can to make them competitive for sure and to help them, but really to help them thread the way through the difficulties of actually getting into the export arena.
Yes. With regards to the export arena, is there one thing that you think InvestNI could do better?
No, I don't think there is. I have a lot of time for InvestNI. I've been on the receiving end, let's say, of their services. I've been a client in one shape or another when I used to work for Shorts, when I worked for RFD, and in more recent times at Wrights for something like 25, 26 years. And I've seen the organisation grow. And I think in recent years in particular, we've seen a leadership now that is much more, let's say, customer service friendly. And I'm delighted to see that. I wish they had more money to spend, frankly. I think the issue is more that they aren't the only participant in the provision of service to would-be exporters. And if you're a big company and you can afford to have somebody in your organisation or people in your organisation finding the way through the organisations and governmental, non-governmental organisations that support exporters, that's grand. And I spend a lot of time doing it myself. But if you're a company, say the size of Richards or smaller, that is busy innovating, being entrepreneurial, managing the issues of expansion, access to finance, and so forth, the last thing you want to have to do, frankly, is figure out in a large organisation like Invest or in Dell or in one of the many agencies that provide export support, who you're supposed to speak to, how do you get the advice? Because one of the things that you'll find everywhere is everybody's got good broad advice and good broad encouragement, but it actually comes down to the details and the specifics about how you begin to import the goods and export them when finished. You maybe want to pick up on that, Richard.
Just for example, yesterday the UK Trade and Industry they were here as part of one of 6 cities that they're visiting across the UK this week. InvestNI brought them across, and there are massive opportunities for our company in Chile, Nicaragua, Mexico, all of these countries. Now, the challenge of actually going there and having the right technology and being able to make the thing here and make it competitively, that doesn't worry me at all, because I know that we could go there and be competitive. Now, imagine then we go and we do a deal and we have container loads of equipment here in Northern Ireland. It's the actual getting from here to the country, there's all of the agencies that we talk about who give all this high-level information and strategy, and then there's shipping agents, there's HMRC, there's a myriad of people, and we would need to employ somebody full-time to actually get the goods from here to here. Now, that's okay when you reach a certain critical mass, but to start with, that's a very daunting prospect. So it's actually not going and getting the business, or here I believe certainly our innovation base is strong enough to compete in any market in the world, but actually getting the goods from here to there is a very, when you're trying to manage and grow a business, like we started off in 2008, my wife, myself and a student in the corner of the bar on the farm, and now we've grown significantly to a factory in Lisburn. But even so, even with that growth, you're so busy managing that growth, and you're so busy looking to business, you know, to take on that actual transport and that getting the goods there is a very significant issue and a very significant barrier in us growing in export markets.
If I could change the tack, the questioning now to recruitment difficulties.
Yeah.
Because obviously it's very vitally important. The environment we've been in over the last 7 years, the rate of unemployment and everything else that goes with that, coming out of recession, hopefully going into recovery. What are the pressures on companies at the present time on recruitment?
Well, I can really only give you personal experience. Actually finding good people. I know that sounds really strange, but finding people that are committed and dedicated, and it's not even to do with education. Very often it's to do with experience. Like, for example, in our stores, we've recruited probably 8 or 9 different stores people in a period of 2 years, and they just come and they go, and they don't dedicate at all to wanting to grow with the business. So it's difficult. It's difficult. But on the other hand, with some very good people as well. It's a
and those people that have a low attrition rate, are they moving on to a different job, or are they just leaving work? Have you?
I'm sorry, I'm not used to giving
you're okay.
things at committees, but I'm a very simple person, and I wanted people in the stores. I walked into what I don't know what it's called now, job centre or whatever it's called in Lisburn. I said, give us a list of people with stores experience. No, they couldn't do that. You have to advertise, and you have to this, and you have to that. So if you don't advertise, you have to go through an agency.
Yes.
And to be truthful, the quality that you get is not always good, and that's the issue. And it's not us. We have never paid anybody off. Never. It's they come and they go. They just don't. They're just not. You know, we hear all about foreign nationals coming in, and we hear. I can say it in the local market. There's a lot of people who just don't want to seem to be employed.
Interesting. So it's nearly a mindset rather than a skill base.
Mindset. Yeah, it's mindset and skill base.
I think if I could add to that as well, and every company you talk to will say, oh, well, we're short of engineers, we're short of ICC. Everybody will have a particular skill. I mean, I talk to colleagues in the Chamber who are looking to expand in the aerospace business, for instance, and there's huge opportunity for us to ride on the back, actually, of the boom in aerospace at the moment and follow the lead of Bombardier and others. And we're probably short of 200 or 300 engineers in the aerospace sector. We must focus on engineering in Northern Ireland. We've got to keep focusing on manufacturing, making things, because that actually creates wealth, not just for the people that do the final assembly like us, but for the hundreds of smaller companies that actually, cluster around that. But I would say again, and it's in the context of something we face as a large employer, is that it's our perception that the employability skills of school leavers, of the kind of people that are applying for, let's say, our apprentices. We create 50 apprenticeships every year in Wrights that have the prospect of lifelong employment. The employability skills, the general skills, and I'm talking about their basic language skills, their basic arithmetical ability, and their, let's just say, their awareness of technology and what it does is diminishing, in our opinion. And that's a concern. We shouldn't be having to compensate by actually adding, if you like, a level of education of our own. We're very happy to take an apprentice and mould them and give them the skills that hopefully give them that lifelong path. Maybe it's a perception, but I get this by talking to the heads of our training departments and the people who actually work with the young folks coming in, who would say, the raw material, Mark, isn't what it used to be.
Final question, Chair. Should the Chamber then maybe impose themselves more, and large employers impose themselves more on the education system? And do you find that a barrier rather than an opportunity?
It's not a barrier. I mean, we talk all the time to Dell. A minister has taken great interest in the needs, I think, of the large companies. People say the right things. I just haven't seen the evidence yet delivered in terms of the employability of the young folks coming forward. But I'm hopeful.
We do participate. For example, Minister Barry's had working groups on apprenticeships, on engineering, etc. So our members do participate in all of that.
But at Stephen Farry's ministerial level and his department, it's probably too late. It really needs to be at the primary school and the secondary school level.
As a personal individual, I've been a board member of Young Enterprise for a number of years, and so I personally get engaged with that. And we also would provide, as a chamber, mentors and case studies, etc., to business. But the whole business education piece is a major challenge. There isn't enough. And again, as a board member of Young Enterprise, that organisation trying to encourage people to think about starting businesses, for example, they're funded year on year. You can do it. You can't long-term plan year on year, and that whole area needs reviewed as well as export support.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Dunn, Gordon.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks very much, folks, for coming along. Interesting discussion we've had this morning. Research and development is an issue that we have covered quite a bit within this committee. We've actually had an in-depth study into it and came forward with a very useful report. We've looked a lot about getting access to funding, the difficulties in getting access to funding. SMEs, and Richard's a typical example of one, are obviously very busy doing their day job. How can we help them in trying to get access to funding to carry out work in R&D? Do you want to pick it up?
Okay, yeah, well, I come from a research and development background through my whole life, even prior to starting Solmatics. Certainly within Invest, there are some very good schemes for R&D support. There's no question about that, and they're not as onerous and as clumsy as they used to be in terms of the application. That has improved very dramatically. And I was involved very similar to Mark, right from when Invest came into being, and even before that IRTU, in R&D funding. And it got quite complex in terms of its application, very off-putting, to the point where, particularly when we started out our business, we decided we would actually borrow the money from the bank and then claim R&D tax credit. It was simpler and quicker, and it was easier to convince the bank than it was to go through that process. Now that has changed, but again I would say that what seems to be happening as well is there are an awful lot of R&D funding providers, and that is very confusing. There are council providers, there are a myriad of providers of a little amount of money, when in actual fact what you need is someone to come in and shadow you and work with you to go. The development process is never just a quick hit for a week or a month or 6 months. Very often products are continually evolving and take a year, 18 months, 2 months, and I'm sure Mark would say the same in the larger bus products. So a lot of small pieces of money which are seen as having low risk if they go wrong is maybe not necessarily the way to approach it. There needs to be a better evaluation of the ones that are likely to give very long-term benefit to Northern Ireland.
Invest would be one of the leading providers on that. I understand they use a lot of the European Regional Development Fund for it. How good has that been in relation to even in the bigger businesses, the larger manufacturing?
Yeah, I think I'd echo what Richard said about in the last 4 or 5 years. I think the path, if you like, through to R&D funding through Invest has got a lot smoother, and I know it's onerous because it's perceived as state aid. There's an awful lot of bureaucracy that goes in behind it. Invest have got to be very careful about what they do in terms of their subsequent audits and so forth. Yeah. So there are times when it gets frustratingly bureaucratic, but it's something you just have to kind of grit your teeth and way through. And there are fast tracks now there, which is helpful. I have a feeling that we're still not as smart as we might be in terms of tapping into EU funding. And from time to time, I will read, even in my industry, of the EU funding of a European-wide project in public transport, for instance, and I'll think, gosh, I'm reading about this now after they've made the awards. Where was I a year ago? And I'm kind of kicking myself for not knowing about it. But I suspect we would need to be camped in Brussels and working really hard, ferreting out these opportunities, which is the way some countries do it. It has to be said.
We visited Bombardier and we saw their evidence that they'd got funding through the Framework 7 programme, which was great to see. One of the, I suppose, of the examples of a good business and where it's working effectively. But there's a lot of effort obviously that's gone into to draw down that money, something that SMEs can't do. Horizon 2020, we hope, will open new doors in relation to funding. What sort of benefits would you like to see flowing from that?
I suppose at the minute what we're doing in terms of access to finance as a chamber, we're trying to make connections between banks and small businesses through a number of programmes we're doing, so that banks can hear directly on feedback. Banks are saying they're open for business and we want to make sure they are by interconnecting generally. But we're also sharing the information on the programmes that you can get through Invest NI, and that portfolio of access to finance projects like the Growth Fund and NISPRO Fund, they're good, and they're actually stimulating some bank lending now by sharing the risk, and that's funded through RDF, and I would encourage you to keep doing that. But we're also working to encourage SMEs to take a different approach. With the greatest respect, they've been used to going in and getting a loan based on, secured by property or personal guarantees that no one thought they'd ever come back on. And businesses now need much more support to actually get their applications through to banks, and things like the finance vouchers are good, but I still think businesses need more hand-holding in that whole application process. We're trying to do that for our members, but it's something I don't know how it's really happening elsewhere.
Okay, thanks very much. Thanks, Chair.
Just coming in on the back of that, and we've placed considerable emphasis as a committee on the likes of Horizon 2020 and COSMA, and you're aware, and the rest of them, they've set a target of 1 billion of a drawdown from those funds. Could you tell me, has there been any engagement with or by Invest NI or the department with yourselves formally around preparation for companies that you would represent to be better prepared than they were for FP7, because it was, quite frankly, by comparison...
We haven't had direct interaction with Invest on it. Personally, again, I actually went out, Martina Anderson arranged a trip with with all the chambers in Northern Ireland to go out to find out what Horizon 2020 was about. And again, she's continued that engagement since we came home. And we're actually working along with Dublin Chamber of Commerce to...
with what?
Northern Ireland Chamber are working with Dublin Chamber of Commerce ourselves to see to put together some initiatives that we'd like to see come out of Horizon 2020. But we're at the early stages of that development at this stage. Yeah.
But there has been no engagement by the department or Invest NI around this formal engagement with yourselves?
Not with us, no.
Right, okay. Right, that's fine.
Chairman, just on that, there is an individual person set up within DETI, isn't there, to run the programme?
That's why it surprises me.
Yeah, has there been any engagement?
Because I would have thought you would be the first port of call,
Only through the Martina Anderson engagement.
Not otherwise.
Okay. Right,
Thanks, Chair. Thank you.
That's disappointing to hear, but nevertheless, not surprising. We have a number of events, just by the way, as you're talking there. We have an engagement with the Green Investment Bank coming up in June time, where stakeholders such as yourselves would be important to us that they be there because of that renewable side. I'm sure, Richard, you'll be interested to hear that. And congratulations on growing your company. I would like to call out, because of an interest in this PV thing, not a declared financial interest, have a particular interest in learning more about it. I wouldn't mind calling out someday if that could be facilitated.
Any time, and any of the committee are welcome. There's an awful lot of, sorry to interrupt, Chairman, there's an awful lot of stuff talked by people about PV.
Yes.
It's never going to be the whole solution for everything.
Yes.
But it has its place, and there's an awful lot of stuff talked that is both right and wrong. So I'd be happy to show you what it really is about.
And on the issue, just this is a question for you: are there not sort of export or shipping type agents that you can engage? You know, an independent company, not just somebody working within your company, because that depends on how large the company is and how it can afford them.
There are shipping agents you can engage, but they don't do the whole job from start to finish.
Right. Okay.
There's a myriad of paperwork in preparation for your submissions to HMRC and for the whole way through. That's the issue. HMRC are actually in with us today because when we were actually bringing in some goods from Europe, we put a name of the company in the wrong box on a complicated form. And that that's an example of how it's even when you think you know what you're doing, in a simple matter of bringing something from Germany, you can easily make a mistake. And it's just that whole process guiding you through to start off.
As a chamber, we actually process 10,000 documents a year, and I have a team working on that. It's carnies and Egyptians, things that I don't quite know the detail of myself. But our staff, before the business brings the paperwork into us, they have pages and pages and pages of information. We spend our time really helping them do that, but it's very, very, very time consuming for business.
That's okay. Thank you for that. Mrs. O'Brien, Sandra.
Thank you, Chair. The questions I was going to ask are already been asked, so I've thought of more, don't worry. Thank you very much for your time today. It's really interesting to hear from your perspective. Just a couple of things I want to build on. Building networks is crucial to exporting across the world, and you know it's getting those contacts and building those contacts, and a lot of our SMEs obviously have difficulty in doing that, and depending on just one avenue for that for investing. I mean, I just wonder what more can be done to enhance those networks and maybe provide some more advice.
That's absolutely the start point for any would-be exporter. And when you take those first steps, it is incredibly daunting. If you have sufficient scale and you're on the radar screen of Invest, then there is obviously there's an opportunity to sort of tap into their support network. But we recognised in the Chamber that actually companies that were not on the radar screen, the SMEs, particularly the very small SMEs, frankly, had offers of help from 12 and 14 different agencies, but nobody giving them the right kind of help. So we decided to fill that vacuum ourselves, and we have a couple of programs. We run a program called Export First, which is all about nurturing, mentoring, pointing small companies the right way. We do that by getting them to network together, but we bring them into larger companies where they can share experiences and ask, frankly, some of the stupid questions, and where do I go for this, and how do I ship something, and which forms do I need? The Chamber also runs a program called Chamber Connections, which does exactly what you've just talked about, where I would like to offer my product in Dubai. Where do I begin? Okay, let us put you in touch with the Chamber of Commerce in Dubai. They will understand who you need to talk to, who the distributors are, how you get the stuff into that country, how you move it out once you're there. And it's those tailored programs that there is a dearth of, and that's where we felt we could really fill the gap and use the fact that the Chamber in Northern Ireland is part of a worldwide chamber network. And that is invaluable, and we need to see an awful lot more development of that possibility.
I don't think that's well enough recognised at this stage. And one thing about our initiatives, because they're private sector funded, we have no limitations. When we were doing our Gateways project cross-border initiative, the first time we did it, it was funded through SAUPB, and it was very welcome, the funding. But we weren't allowed to help anyone that had any particular link, had any interaction with Invest. So, for example, I would have had fantastic buyers on a cross-border basis that were willing to meet these individual small businesses, but if they, say, had a small marketing grant 10 years ago, or if they had even just registered in Northern Ireland Business Info, because of the way the funding was, I wasn't allowed to help them. So we ended up having 280 businesses there, but I had to reject about 300, another 300, and I think that's a big issue with some of that funding. There needs to be clarity. What does it mean if you're investing in Clyde? Does it mean you got a bit of information 2 years ago, you had a small marketing grant, or does it mean you're one of their have a client executive and you're on the fast track? There needs to be some clarity there. Because it was really embarrassing having to say to small businesses, sorry, you can't come, even if they did products and services for the clients that we had. Now this year we're funding it ourselves. We've got a bank sponsored, and so that means we can just get on with it. And I have buyers from 15 great buyers with products, and I can let whoever wants come there as long as they have the products and services that those buyers want.
That's concerning. We should maybe get some clarification from Invest NI on that. Sorry, the other, how do we, I mean, the challenge is there are some companies that recognise that the ability to export, there are others that don't even think export. How do we get those? How do we get to those? How do we reach those companies? Do you have the answer to that?
That's why we started this Growing Something Brilliant campaign.
That was exactly why we did it. We decided just to make a lot of noise about it.
Okay.
And we've held for nearly a year now a series of rolling events, conferences, where we've invited everybody to try to inspire them, just to try to say, look, other people have done this before. You're nervous, you may not think you have the resources, but there are people in this room that can talk to you about it, and just to encourage them to take that first step, or hire that one person, or make that one phone call. And I think it's been very successful, and we've supplemented that, as I say, with the mentoring stuff, with the coaching stuff, with specific seminars on skills development for exports. And it's a campaign which continues. You know, we're in the spring of this year, April, May time, we'll have another conference where we're specifically going to target the SMEs in this case, and again try to inspire them into the export arena and show them the kind of help that's available.
Initially we'd have been quite Belfast focused, but we just not in terms of membership, we have membership all over, but for events. So we've now, last year we've been out in Terex and Dungannon and inviting businesses, and we were in Coleraine, and this year there's a bigger plans for that. So we're doing our bit to get out there and help those businesses.
Just finally, if I have some time, addressing the challenge, I mean, you're asking government to develop an explicit export strategy action plan. You were nearly apologetic in saying strategy.
I know, we really need an action plan. Yeah.
Have you put this to government? What has been their reaction? Because, it's...
Because the research has just come through.
It's just like...
Yeah. We've obviously, we would know Invest NI quite well, and we've said to them we need an action plan, and I think they agree. We've also interacted informally with colleagues in DETI, or people we know in DETI, and said the same. So I think we're pushing an open door. We just need to get on with it.
That's very important, I agree. Okay, good luck with that.
Right, and just on that point, I've read basically your broad themes here, addressing the challenge, the scale of the export needs to be recognised. Government should lead by a review of export data, a review of the export support system. I'm surprised. Are you saying that's not happening at the moment?
No, I think we're saying that there's so much data. Frankly, there are so many strategies that it's now hard to see the wood for the trees. There's so many departments, so many agencies who think it's their responsibility to lead the charge on export. It's utterly confusing for small companies. And those agencies are all motivated, they're all wanting to do the right thing. We're saying, can we get some joined up thinking? Can we agree who is actually leading the charge? Can we agree who is the follower? And can we make the signposting of what's available really clear to the aspirant exporters?
I don't think we cooperate enough. We all know what each other is doing, but we all do it in silos.
What I'm getting at here is a review, and a review can be used to kick the ball away down the alleyway and away it goes. If I was to ask you in, say, 3, 4 or 5 headings, what clear direction or outcomes would you want to see as a consequence of that? In other words, what product would you want?
I actually think we need to... I'm formerly Chief Executive of Enterprise in Northern Ireland, and when we started out, it was 13 years ago with Enterprise in Northern Ireland, anybody that started a business faced the same issue as anyone that has now grown a business. They didn't know where to go for support. You could have gone into Legia at that time, and you could have gone into an enterprise agency. But it started off with a phone call. online, and it was very confusing. And what we did out of that was, after a piece of work, we actually then branded the support. And I know people have different opinions on the Go For It campaign, but if you made the phone call, you knew you were ringing the Go For It campaign. And when you were going next day to see your enterprise agency branded as Go For It, you knew it was all connected, and you knew that's where you could go for startup training. And we want something like that to happen around the export. We want small business to know that if you're at this stage of development, this is where you go. If you're at that stage, this is where you go. And we all cooperate and brand everything in some sort of single format. We had done some work in this regard a number of years ago where we just looked at the continuum of support. And if you were at early stage development, perhaps that's enterprise agency through council. If you're at the next stage, it could be chambers and invest. If you're at the next stage, it's invest. But when the recession hit, we got focused on the Jobs Fund and Business Boost, and we stopped cooperating and talking about that. We'd like that to happen again. So everybody that's supporting exporters know what they're doing, and the businesses know how to get that support without having to go to 10 places.
I'm getting the broad themes of where you're going there, and I understand what you're saying. We're meeting the department and Invest NI on the 20th of this month. Now, granted, we'll forward over your papers, but if you could distill all your thinking right down, particularly in regard to the strategy that you would see.
It's like the enterprise.
And could give us some, this is what about this, what about that, what about the other, so that we're very focused on what business, as you would see, need to be the outcomes of this strategic.
Yeah, I mean, we have a policy paper on exporting, on the challenge.
Yes.
Rather than read it out to you today, I'd like the opportunity, Chairman, just to distill that to 4 or 5 bullets for you, and
that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Right to you on that.
One immediate one would be to be like Enterprise Ireland and have a very specific division for export support, which is the first shop.
Okay. Thank you for that. Can we come to Mr. McKinney?
Thanks very much, Chair. I think this latter part of the conversation is getting close to the nub of the thing, but I'm also on the Health Committee, and one of the things I think we're discovering is that if you don't have a common understanding and knowledge of the problem, that you'll end up putting in a review, or you'll end up sticking in some training or something like that, which will treat the symptom rather than the fundamental cause. And do you think, given what you're saying in your latter slides here about a review of export data, etc., is there a common understanding of the problem in government across all its layers before you start reaching for answers?
I think the data is well known. It's interpretive, but the data is well known. I mean, the government departments that we interact with know fine well our ranking, if you like, and where we stand against where we should be.
Well, is that consistent with looking for assessing the true extent of NI exporting?
Okay. Sorry, I didn't catch it.
Is that consistent, if the data is well known, is that consistent with your call to assess the true extent?
I didn't want to contradict Mark there. We do know the number of exporters out there in terms of goods. We have no idea the number of service exporters there. And when we're trying to compare information, I'm going to ask Maureen to add, when you're trying to compare information, there's different sources. Maureen would be able to help in that.
Yeah, I mean, just from experience, I actually started the manufacturing sales and export service, so I know what's the content of that, and it's very good. But there's just a sense from all of the research that we've done that we don't know the very bottom layer of what's happening with exports. So yes, if we get the top 10, as you can see from the manufacturing survey, we kind of know a lot. But there's an awful lot of activity happening at that bottom level in terms of exporting that might not get picked up. Cross-border sales, for example, a piece of work Philip McDonough and I recently completed for the Centre for Cross-Border Studies. There's actually an awful lot of cross-border activity at the very lowest level that's probably not getting picked up, but it's really critical in terms of a first step into export markets, you know. So,
but it's back to the point: if we don't know what the problem is, and if we can't agree what the problem is, how are you going to ever point to an answer?
That's why we would like more data. And even, you see the target to grow manufacturing export by 20% from what base, it's a bit of a hard target when you don't quite know
and the
what the base is.
20% as well, because you have those 10 companies, all it takes is a really good or bad performance, as we have always said, from one of those, and that can drive your up towards your 20%. It doesn't actually tell you what's happening on the ground, which is the last quarterly survey for the Chamber. The export sales and orders were weak for manufacturing. There's been no consistency building there, unfortunately, as yet. It might do in terms of the next couple of quarters. But again, it's just trying to understand that lower level and what's happening there. And that's obviously both trying to get to the data, but just talking to companies as well, which I think the departments would get an awful lot of value of speaking more with companies themselves.
Thank you, Chair. I have some more, Chair, but just reflect back. I think the committee is slightly ahead of the curve on this because we have been doing some work around the Bradley report, which has pointed to the fact that there isn't that regional, sub-regional data there. Obviously, there are the bigger economic swirls or winds circulating around which have affected us. But that still can't account for, in my mind, the differential between exporting in the south and the north. What do you think is the real cause there?
But we think we don't know all the answers to that, but there's a couple. One would be they've much, because of their lower levels of corporation tax, they've much more inward investment. Inward investment then has a supply chain. That supply chain supplies it. Then they also supply externally. Do you want to add anything, Dan?
Well, the only thing I can add, and it's from my own real experience, last year I spent, I finally got around to doing some training actually, and did some training and development anyway for a year alongside 36 CEOs of Irish companies. So it was very interesting for 4 companies from the north to compare and contrast with companies from the south, and we talked an awful lot together about where we were headed in terms of developing strategies for export. And my sense was that they're ahead because they have an export culture, because everybody buys into it, top to bottom, that there is this continuum, there is this joined-up thinking that all the government departments all know their place, and everybody, all the way up to Taoiseach, knows that's the number one priority. So if a company, an Irish company, needs help in the export market, needs an obstacle removed, needs the road unblocked, it seemed to me that everybody swung in support all the way up to the top. Now, that's where we should be, and we're not there yet.
I don't
And
think
you, in your 25 or more years' experience here, don't see that or recognise that here?
I get frustrated because this is a wonderful place, and it has such huge potential. Fantastic people, engineers like Richard, innovation, abounds here. And so it's so frustrating when you can't deliver that to the customers, the marketplace, because you're having to manage your way around roadblocks and red tape.
Yes, but we can all praise the staff, and I think it's important to praise the efforts of those who engage positively, and indeed your company as well, and I would join in that praise of your recent success. But that is, once again, a slightly issue avoidance. The real kernel, what's the real kernel in terms of political will?
I do think it's culture, and it takes time. I do think it's culture. Everybody has to buy into the fact that we will not rebalance the economy without huge focus on export. Simple as that.
At all levels, actually, because the Taoiseach invited a number of Northern Ireland business organisations to an event just before Christmas. It was at Dublin Castle over a weekend. I can't remember the title of the event, but it was all about the diaspora. And I spent 2 days with people from all over the world who were spending, a week in Ireland, in the island, trying to help export grow. And with the Taoiseach and the Taoiseach there all weekend, and it was the time he had that vote about the Upper House, so he was a man under pressure that weekend, but he was there encouraging export, and it was across the board.
Just one technical issue, of course. I don't want to get into a constitutional round.
I know.
But we don't count our trade into the UK as export. Does that affect the figures?
No, we don't. It's because it's the same. They're our second biggest customer, so we are missing the point there. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, it is an important point in terms of putting from a target perspective, because it can be a big step for companies to trade into GB, but it's obviously not recognised as an export because part of the UK.
Could that be put in another column somewhere sufficient to satisfy everybody in the room, and would allow the figures to look different in an honest way and not just look different?
Probably could.
Patrick, can you just ask a short question on that?
Very briefly, Phil.
I think the baseline target for exports, it doesn't include exports to Britain, but the actual performance we're monitoring does.
I don't know. Don't know.
Well,
So, Maureen, do you know that?
Well, obviously Alistair Hamilton raised this one a couple of weeks ago in terms of the kind of pressure that they're under to meet those targets.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, there's only one target for exports in the central government, and that's at 20%.
Yes.
of course, like all data, you could spend your time chasing a whole pile of data and not get the real work done.
So,
you know?
so the data is confusing, isn't it?
Can I come on to Mr. Douglas? Sammy.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks very much for the presentation. I read this presentation. It would be good if we could get an electronic copy from our
Yeah, that's okay.
It was very good.
And we have a paper to go with it with more detail, actually, if that's okay.
That'd be very helpful.
And your pack will email it to you.
Just, it actually says here about the Danske Bank export first to learn from other exporters. Can you maybe tease out a wee bit more about your relationship with the bank? You had mentioned earlier on, are they now sponsoring you? Is one of the banks sponsoring you?
There's a couple of, obviously as a Chamber of Commerce, all the banks in Northern Ireland would be members, so we know them. We actually have two banks on our board. I have Kevin Kingston, the head of the Deputy Chief Executive, on my board, and I have Alvina Graham on my board as well. So we're connected at that level. But over the last couple of years, those businesses, or those banks, obviously they are getting criticised through the Access to Finance group, through others, and through everyone around us criticising banks for their lack of interaction, perceived interaction with business. And we've been encouraging them to meet businesses directly, and all three banks are now funding us to run these programmes. So they are putting their money where their mouth is. And the Danske Bank programme has enabled us, basically they're providing me, I'll not say the amount, but a certain amount of money. It allows us to do 26 events a year. It allows us to engage other exporters, and through that initiative, in the first year we helped 280 businesses. And this year we're doing something similar. The Bank of Ireland have taken on the Gateways programme, and that's cross-border, meet the buyer. Again, that will allow us to do direct help. And that direct help, it just allows us to do our job. And that's meet the buyers, make connections. An Ulster Bank are coming in and so on.
That's very encouraging, but when you go to the other aspect of it in terms of businesses, small businesses, there's maybe some larger ones, there's, as you say, there's still that criticism. Are the banks changing? Or are they hard not to crack?
I think they are.
Well, I'll give you personal experience again on that, Sir Douglas. I have to say that, and it's Danske Bank, and actually it wasn't connected to the Chamber, it was... Danske Bank have been exceptional with us.
Good.
Right enough, I was maybe very upfront, and I said, listen, only give me a manager that's got imagination. If you're not going to do that, I'm not going to deal with you. And they did do that.
Good.
And even last week, now, okay, we had to completely 100% secure the initial stuff with all our personal belongings to start with. But last week was a big step because they've moved into the unsecured territory with us quite significantly. But it's again about presenting the business case. If you've got your numbers and your projections, and if you've delivered year on year what you said you're delivering, my experience particularly with Danske Bank, has been excellent. I have to be really honest with them. So there's a lot of criticism, and I know all the criticism, and there's a lot of things that they've been, whatever they've been doing. But our personal experience, particularly with Danske Bank, and in the last week, has been exceptional.
That's good.
So,
thanks, Richard.
Maureen,
The Chamber actually asked in the last quarterly survey about the members' relationship with the banks, and it was much more positive than it was negative.
Yes, I saw that in your report there.
Thank you.
But you, Sam? Thank you. Ms. Fearon, Megan.
Thank you. It's just kind of coming on the back of what Mr. McKinney was talking about earlier. Obviously, there's a serious lack of accurate economic data pertaining solely to the economic situation in the north, and we have no measure of GDP for the north. But we do know that I think it's around 37% of our GVA comes from cross-border trade. And I was just wondering, of your opinion, do you think that the department is doing enough to encourage that all-island approach to stimulating economic growth? Or?
Yes, I said that piece of work we recently completed, you know, the Intertrade Ireland have a very important role to play in cross-border trade, and they have a couple of excellent programmes in terms of getting in market. And it's a massive market in terms of first-time exporters. But it's quite interesting because what the research did show that the closer you were to the border, the more likely you were to export. So this was a border, it was about the development of a border development zone. And what it suggested was actually the issue wasn't necessarily along the border, because it was very natural for businesses to trade in two currencies, to deal with all the regulatory issues. It was actually to the north of the north the issue was, and trying to get businesses there, because there are obviously cultural issues to think about trading with the south, but it's an extremely important part of the whole export story.
And just finally, another cross-border issue. Do you have any analysis on the HGV levy that on cross-border trade that's going to have a serious impact on SMEs that heavily rely on cross-border trade?
We don't have any.
I'm sorry, no.
Sorry.
Would you be able to come back to us about that, or?
Yep.
Yeah, we will.
Take that one off.
And then finally, just I know we spoke about Horizon 2020 earlier, but I was just wondering what your opinion was on our target drawdown. I think it's only 100 million or something in comparison to 1.3 billion in the south.
They've always been better at us.
Yeah, I think.
So I think, obviously, I think we should try and increase our target.
Yeah.
That's not for
European
me.
operation leaves a lot to be desired in the north.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
It does. And just on that point, thanks for drawing us in there, Megan. On the research and development, I just read there's a paragraph on it there, particularly about local exporters on the services, and they had done some research and development themselves. However, exporters have concerns over the timeliness of the government-supported R&D application process, along with the skills of those involved in the process. Could you maybe expand on that for us too, because clearly this is flagging up a deficit there.
Can you help us with that one?
Could you just repeat that one again?
Yeah.
It's on page 11 of the document here. If you have the document, on the addendum, it's called Addendum Business Specific Support Challenges. It deals, the top of the page starts with skills, then it moves on to research and development. It's page 11 in the document, and you see it there. And in the right-hand column, research and development, just the second paragraph there. Yeah. Exporters have concerns over the timeliness of the government-supported R&D application process. Read that bit. You got that bit? Aye.
That
Along
was
with the
really
skills of those involved in the process.
That actually came out in one of our round-table forums. Actually, with I can't remember who we had that time.
20 top.
I see it's referred.
Oh, so I knew we 20 top businesses in the round table, but we were sharing experience.
Yeah.
And round the table, all of those businesses said that you know they could do more on R&D, but they felt they didn't work as closely as they could have done with universities and
Yes.
FE colleges. That was what that is. A statement of fact.
Around disconnect with and again, this disconnect theme that's come up.
Keeps coming up.
It keeps coming up.
I'll go back to the original data on that, but it was was at a round table dinner. I think it actually may have been was the chairman and the chief executive of Invest NI that day, but various barriers that were to export were raised, and that was one of them.
But if R&D is one of those for innovation.
Yeah, I would have more backup data.
Again, that disconnect that you've referred to, that's just not a perception, because you've referred to the disconnect, as I'm calling it.
Yes.
That I would have been anticipating that at this stage, from 6 months ago into the previous year, that people should have been engaging with you around Horizon 2020 and the opportunities that are coming up from that. You've clearly done it off your own bat with the Chamber of Commerce in Dublin, but I would have thought that the people who are employed to do these things should have been really putting on their thinking hats and identifying opportunities now and getting out there and where the money is available to do the work. But as I say, it's disappointing that that's happening, but it's clearly reflected by your members.
I think it's all because everybody has specific targets, and they get on and deliver their specific targets. We all sometimes get quite busy, and we don't look over our shoulder or talk the way we should, and that's what I think is happens generally on the support system.
Well, yes, target's one thing if it's ambitious enough, and
Yeah.
I can refer to that in terms of
Yeah.
finance. And FP7, frankly, the North was pathetic by comparison to the rest of the island in its drawdown. Clearly there's work to be done there for
Yeah.
people to get their focus, and their target may be the wrong one. Their target should be the one of connecting with people like yourselves and academia to make sure that the link-ups going on there to identify opportunities and to draw down the funds.
I think we need a more cooperative
Completely.
group, and we're not as cooperative as we could be.
That's common sense, but clearly common sense in this case mightn't be that common, you know.
Yeah.
So can we move on then to Mr. Agnew, Stephen?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. And I suppose I'd have to say I'm delighted to see two green businesses at the head of the table. The green economy isn't just a nice slogan, it's something that's clearly doing well in Northern Ireland. It's to come back, and sorry, Chair, I probably should indicate at the time it was specifically on a point Richard was addressing at the time about the number of sources of R&D funding. But again, it sounds similar around the advice around exports, or R&D support, I should say. There's a lot of a little, and what you need is a little of a lot, perhaps, if that's the right word. Could you just highlight for us some of you mentioned invest and councils being two. You know, what other strands of R&D support?
There's Science Park. There's in fact there's that many. If I was really honest with you, I haven't time to troll through them all.
Okay.
Right. If you can I put you in sort of when you're sitting on my side of the desk and you have a small company and you have an idea and it's probably short to medium term R&D. You're talking maybe the 6 to 12 month time frame. Okay. So what you need to do is you need to devote your best resources to get it done quickly to give you competitive advantage, because that's what you're seeking, a competitive advantage in the world or in the local economy. So you have a choice. You spend time trawling to look for these bits of support and doing all the applications, or do you get on and do it, get it to market first and actually bring in some revenue as a result of doing that? And I have always chosen get on and do it, and then try and look for the funding from the bank or from somewhere else. Now, it's a very difficult route that to do, because you have to expose yourself completely to the risk of it. The thing about the situation is you can't afford a lot of time to go and look. I'm not trying to evade your question. I'm saying there are so many, you don't have the time to go and look. And you know, if it doesn't matter what you're going to develop, it's going to take 10 to 50,000. Any sensible product or service. So £2,000 or £3,000 to go and do a patent search or to go and do something like that, it's absolutely meaningless. You can go online and you can do it yourself.
Yes.
And things like that. So little drips here and there. Don't do it for me as a small business, and that's a personal experience. It's not a criticism of anybody and the way we've got there. It's just the way it is when you're sitting on my side of the desk.
Really,
The other thing I remember with that,
if I could comment on that, really what you require is a point person. So I'm going to go to you left the phone, and could be Invest NI. You left the phone and say, look, I have an idea here. Can you give me directions as to where to go?
Yeah, it's not even the development. It's you know, you're asked at the time when you have the idea to project out 3 to 5 years. You know, stick your finger in the air and pull out a number. You know, it doesn't. It's all on the wrong basis.
Yes.
sorry, Patsy, your last comment on R&D, I just took a moment to recall what that was about. What that was some people have very technical ideas, and the people around the table that they did, and they felt that the people that they were applying to were more operatives that didn't understand their sectors. So whether it was renewable energy or whether it was food or technology, that was the problem. So that led to a more protracted application process.
But that's an upskilling process.
Yes,
They should know.
that's it. Sorry, I was a bit hesitant earlier.
If within the system people don't know or aren't up to speed with what's happening out there,
Yes.
that's a management and upskilling issue for, like, if you were organising your business like that, you know.
Can I just go further in this? I'm just trying to understand, because I think, Richard, your evidence has been really interesting in the practical steps that you have to take. So when you go to invest in AI, are they flagging up these other sources, or are you individually having to go to each?
We individually have to
And
sort
go
them
to
out.
each. And you're having to do all that. So when you go to invest, that's not there's somebody, we do R&D, here's all your sources, here's your business, no. Okay. 'Cause
you know,
that's- to me, that's what should be happening.
For specific, and I have to say that the technical team and Invest are very good when you get there with a project, and their hands are tied by red tape and by, I mean, you know, they have processes and stuff and understand all that due diligence type stuff. So I'm not taking a shot at them at all.
No,
it's just that there are so many things.
Yeah, and they're all, the ones you listed are all publicly funded, so I mean, I'm working on a piece of legislation around children's services, and we need to pull this money together and stop. Sounds like the same problem. It is. And it requires the same solution. We need a pot. We need
Yeah, I mean,
money to go.
if a business is seeking help, they have to do a business assessment first. But they'll do that with Invest, perhaps, which is really good. But when they come, it would be good if other people had access to that information, or not personal information, but that when a business is coming in and asking us for help, then we wouldn't start asking them the same questions over again. Is one perfect example. Or that the person in
Somebody
Invest
will.
knows exactly, or the person in Invest knows exactly who else can help. It's the same with banks. I be aware with the banks, because we know them quite well. Many of the small business banker advisors weren't really aware of all the access to finance initiatives that Invest have. So we, as a chamber, are sharing that information with banks as well. It really is about talking to each other quite a lot.
And just one final point in this, Chair. Sounds to me like there's overlap as well. I mean, again, these are all publicly funded.
Absolutely.
They're all doing this virtually the same thing. We're not talking about all different specialist areas. They're basically doing the same thing. Okay, that's all I need to know, Chair. Thank you.
We're not publicly funded.
No, I know, of course not.
Mr. McLaughlin, Mitchell.
Well, actually, quite neatly, it has come to the point that occurred to me earlier in the discussion. And it was kind of Mark made me think about it in terms of the this culture issue, and we do have just a proliferation of different kind of agencies and boards and people who are providing support, but there is quite evidently a degree of confusion between, you know, where the boundaries are. So we develop protocols and whatever, and you find then that people can't do this, but you know, you're led up that road, you're introduced with a handshake and sit down to a win, and he says, "I'm sorry, I don't think we can take this any further." And I've heard that story over and over again. I was interested in the report, and this is a very good report and presentation. The British Chamber did a fairly comprehensive piece of work, and I presume Maureen has been in and out and through that. Are there particular issues that were identified there that are a close fit to the peculiar conditions that we are dealing with? And in the context just of the most recent discussion, I mean, our economy, in a sense, is no bigger than some county council areas. If we were to take, say, the European or the British context. And yet, you know, we behave as if like we're nearly a super state, you know, we've got agencies for everything. Is there a way in which, you know, we can, in a sense, take advantage of the downturn and, you know, the export performance, the evident kind of failure of that target that we set ourselves, and we're not going to reverse it in the time it's left in this kind of budget round. Is that an opportunity to just go root and branch at this and produce a model that is actually working elsewhere, best practice that we can actually just take on board? Because this idea of, I mean, we're caught up in a whole discussion with Invest about the difference between, you know, promoting jobs and creating jobs. And, you know, we do desperately defend ourselves and we're the best in the world, and sometimes maybe we're kidding ourselves. Maybe there isn't the either the critical mass or the, you know, the education or the skills base to meet the kind of targets that we set ourselves, because you just wonder where that 20% come from.
Yeah,
I do wonder where that come from, and whether that was just a headline or it was actually you know, a goal that was backed up by a strategy and an action plan, which I don't think it was. But I think that now we could address that.
I think there's an
now we could
opportunity.
address it when you just point and say, look, this is not going to be any better this time next year. So has anybody pushed the red button in the executive, do you think?
I'm not hearing it if they have. And I think what you just described, Mitchell, the root and branch review, and then the model. The model may be not too far south of here, frankly. That's maybe where we should look first.
Yeah.
And there are other models, of course, and you know, there has been benchmarking done with places like Singapore. You know, a small place that has no natural resources, yeah, it's incredibly high GDP, high tech, innovating kind of a culture. Finland, another place that's an absolute hotbed of innovation, small population, you know, geographically dispersed, rotten climate. You know, there's similarities, and yet, you know, they lead the world in some sectors, and are the envy really. And I think they're the highest level of innovation investment in the world. So there are places we can go to look.
Yeah, and that matches with, you know, we hear the story just coming out of County Tyrone about, you know, these small kind of engineering who actually can export and can find a market for their product. Yeah. Now that, you know, as in a sense like one of our strengths, it may not be the type of eventual model of our economy, but in fact it gives us a pointer to what we can do. And
it's very important. It's very important. I was saying yesterday to Mark, I used to work up in Derry, and we knew DuPont, I still call them, even though it's Invista, and there's a real history of about 20 spin-out businesses coming out of there. Yeah. People that had previously had worked directly within DuPont, they moved out, and there was engineering businesses, technology businesses. And because they had that expertise and support, they were able to supply DuPont and other companies worldwide. And we need that. And I mean, there's no secret the whole Tyrone stuff has come out of Terex and all of those companies, and it's all their supply base. Now you have fantastic companies inside the cover. There's Anaconda, and that's a small firm, started out around Draperstown, and they're exporting all over the world really brilliant products, and it's more of that we need.
Yeah. Maureen, you wanted to add something?
Yes, actually, there was a presentation by the All-Ireland Research Observatory last week in Cavan, and it was lovely to see. It was one map of Northern Ireland, and you could see the Tyrone kind of concentration of small, successful businesses, and there was a big dark red patch there, and the rest of Ireland was kind of quiet. So it was great to see that. Just one observation from many of the research I've done is there does seem to be an issue in Northern Ireland with smaller firms around cash flow management. You know, it actually came up in the conference last week. It was southern firms actually saying they don't get paid by northern firms. So, but it was the pieces of research that both Intertrade and ourselves have done, and on both sides of the border, and cash flow. I think there's a big issue with small business here in terms of how they actually. Their financial. Yeah, do you remember we did one of our quarterly economic surveys we just asked business was about finance. Do you remember the detail of that? The one about debt? Well, for example, debt management. Something like 32% of them didn't have a system and process in place, so they weren't chasing their debt. They weren't looking, and that doesn't help their cash flow. So we've been doing some work on that with them.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that, Mitchell. And just by way of information, I've already explained to you that the department and Invest NI are due before us on the 20th of February. As well as that, the North-South Steering Group, which includes some of the people who are charged with the Horizon 2020, are due with us on the 27th of February. So you're probably going to get a rushed phone call in advance of that meeting to say
that's okay.
Cover themselves. And we have further, and I do compliment Intertrade Ireland. I've had experience in some of their work and been to see them operating there. They do valued work as well in stimulating that. So thank you very much indeed for your contributions today. If, by the way, in advance of those issues and organisations and departmental agencies come before, if there are particular issues that you feel should be highlighted, please feel free to get in touch with us, because they're the ones who are there to support you, and it's for us as members here to make sure that that's been done in the efficient way that it should be done. So thank you for that. And those bullet points about the strategy, where those pointers should be. So thanks very much for your time, and please do keep in touch as ever.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you all of you for your time. I've enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Now, members, if it's okay then that we pass on the documentation we've received here today from Chamber of Commerce to the department to make sure that they're well enough prepped in advance of our meeting. That's grand.
Sorry, Chair.
Yeah, Chair, no, I wasn't going to agree with that. It was just before we move on to another issue. We've had the issue here of diverse sources of funding for research and development.
Yes.
I don't know whether we asked Nathan, Aidan to do a research paper on the sources of funding, how much, or do we just write directly to the department?
I would be hoping that that would be one of the key questions we put to the department. Now, if we can, this session has been Hansarded, so there's been a number of issues. If we can leave it to Jim and the committee staff here to distill those issues as they come up, so that we can put them to the department or to this particular North-South Steering Committee on Horizon 2020 and applicable funding mechanism as well. We can decide then and put those as appropriate.
I think, Chair, even if we can present some of the figures, if we were able to say to the department, you fund 14 different sources or whatever it is, a total of this, but we're essentially being told by business it's ineffective because you're funding so many.
I would be hoping to put that direct to them if members are in agreement to the department. You know, what is their signposting mechanism for funding, so that you have somebody that you can ring up and say, look, I have an idea in my head, where can I draw down support from, be it actual support or financial support?
But do you see, before you ask them, Patsy, I'd like to have the answer.
Yeah.
Oh, you mean the actual sources of funding?
Yeah.
Chair, there's the committee's review into research and development should have all of the sources of funding listed, so they can be summarised in the briefing paper that I provide the committee for that briefing.
Yeah, happy enough for that. Okay, and then we also raised the issue there, and I know I would have a particular interest of going to visit Richard's, he mentioned there his PV factory. So can we agree to go and do that at some stage too?
Great.
Okay, thank you. Right. We'll move on next then to what we have is oral briefing from DETI on the SL1 Renewables Obligation Amendment Order, Northern Ireland 2014. And the papers for this item are at page 21, including a cover note, which gives the purpose of the rule, the SL1. And we also have tabled today a report from the London School of Economics on the impact of wind farms on house pricing, which I don't believe we can deal with quite today. It might be useful if we could forward that over to the Environment Committee. I know they're dealing with issues around wind energy at the moment. If we agree to do that, can we agree to do that before we move on to the agreed? Yep. Agreed? Yes. And before us today is Mr. Michael Harris, the head of Renewable Electricity Policy Branch. You're very welcome to the meeting, and I believe you're new in position. This is your first time at the committee, so.
No, actually, it's just a bit of confusion. I think I was down as head of energy, which we have a new head of energy, but
that's what it is, right?
I've been
right.
Not the head of energy.
Well, I was going to say we're going to be easy on you, so we'll.
I mean, we're not going to be easy.
No, sorry. Just joking there. Now, can members, the issue, and you're probably aware, I hope you're aware that just to come back to you. The key issue that came up last week was we received, there was a letter dated the 24th of January from the department. Maybe in fact you were the author of that letter, were you? No? Yes. Paragraph 8. There are a number of reasons for amended levels of support, including longer lead times for planning approval and grid connection, lower levels of solar irradiance and all that type of stuff. But tell me, I put the question to you that came up here from members, is why should any sector out there be paid or financially advantaged for circumstances that are out with the control of the department? Like, I'll take you a stage further. Does this lead to the stage of this delay in a planning application for a retail outlet, for example, that they then turn to the department and say, hi, the planning process has delayed us, we've lost £2 million here in retail outcome as a consequence of that, so therefore we need to be compensated for that. That's, on the face of it, how it appears to me for delays in planning, whether they exist, and they may exist for reasons out with the planning process. It could be a delay in the person getting details around sightlines, around other aspects of the planning application. In other words, the onus and responsibility for that delay may well rest outside the department and outside any government department. It may well rest with the applicant or objectors for that reason. And likewise, the grid issue, which has come up here on a number of occasions, not just with regard to applications for renewables, but in regard to business expansion. So therefore, are we opening up a floodgate here whereby those businesses that can't expand their business, and publicly we've heard of one Dale Farm at Cookstown because of the inadequacy of the grid, do they too then turn to the department or to the executive and say, we need to be compensated because NIE can't get their act together, haven't upgraded the grid, and planning service haven't got their act together, or the objectors have been delaying a process, or the agent has been delaying a process? It's just, to me, this opens up quite a floodgate of issues, and I don't understand the logic in this one, that the department should be compensating developers for issues which are out with their control and responsibility.
Okay, if I can explain the process for solar and the banding which has been introduced for solar PV, Chairman, just to try and explain our reason for doing this. Last year, there was a banding review undertaken across the UK for large-scale renewables, and when I say large-scale, I mean those over 5 megawatts in size. And that brought in, for some technologies, what we call degradation levels. So over the next 3 years, depending on when a generator accredits under the renewables obligation, the degradation in rock banding level will reduce. So in the first year, it might be 2 rocks. If they don't accredit to next year, it could be 1.8, and so on, going down. Some technologies didn't see any change in degradation. For example, large-scale wind went down from 1 rock to 0.9 rocks, and that stays until 2017. There's no degradation in that process at all. But solar is one of those that did see a degradation because the cost of solar have been coming down. Whenever we consulted on it as part of the wider UK review, at that time we didn't get any evidence to suggest that Northern Ireland needed to have any different levels than the rest of the UK, and we implemented the same rock levels that came in last year. However, since then we've had a number of developers who had come to us and said that costs have come down in solar, and where previously Northern Ireland wasn't attractive for large solar, and I never thought I'd ever be in front of a committee talking about large solar for Northern Ireland, but the costs have come down, and it makes Northern Ireland now an attractive proposition for investing in it. But the degradation levels that we had introduced were too steep to actually allow that to happen here, because yes, as you point out, we have a different planning and grid process to the rest of the UK. We have lower levels of solar irradiance, which I think are between maybe 10 and 20 to 30% less than the rest of the UK. So there are those factors that make it slightly more difficult for them to invest here. Planning has got better. You may be aware that yesterday, I think there was a solar company announced that they had now got planning permission for a 5 megawatt wind farm in Bishop's Court. Now that is one of the developers we had been speaking to, and that planning went in when the rock level was 2 rocks, and we just have to wait and see how that progresses, and whether how they continue to progress that project. So we're not increasing rocks because of a grid cost, and it's important to make that point, because we're also looking at reviewing small scale rock levels, and yes, I'm very aware that grid costs have gone up substantially for developers, and we in the department would receive correspondence on that regularly, and we are seeing typically large costs for those grids. But we don't believe that actually throwing more rocks at that is going to solve that grid problem. It isn't going to make it easier for developers. So we believe in this instance that slight, and it is a very small change that we are proposing to make, will lever through. We do believe 50 megawatts per year is what we've been told of solar at this level, bringing in maybe £50 million of investment directly to the Northern Ireland economy through supply chain benefits, through companies here who will be able to be involved in the construction and the maintenance. These solar farms are being put on farmland, and there's a rental for farmers as well for that. So we actually think it is, and of course it adds to our mix. Gives us that wider mix of supply. Most of these are probably going to be located in the east of Northern Ireland, where actually the grid doesn't have the same difficulties as it does in the west. So it gives us that balance. Yes, solar is intermittent. It won't work in the evening, but it is more predictable than wind. And overall, we do think it is a good move. In terms of cost, maybe we could touch on the cost as well, Chairman, because that comes up in terms of what is likely to, and we talk about the cost of renewables. The cost of the ROCs are spread across all UK consumers, and we've done some calculations on this, and actually just by making this slight increase from what the ROC levels were last year, will add less than 1 pence a year to a bill for a consumer for what we would be getting back from that.
Tell me, forgive my ignorance in this, and you're sitting at the back there as the gentleman from the company who was with us earlier with the Chamber of Commerce. Yes. And I want to find out more about this. Now, you mentioned a number of issues there. The cost of the land to the farmers.
Yes.
That's an issue between the developer and the farmer, right? Now, I'll take you through. Now, you mentioned lower local levels of solar irradiance. How do we compare between the likes of North of England and Scotland? I thought it would be very comparable.
Yes, it is, and most of what is going in Great Britain is in the south of England.
As you would expect.
Yes, as you would expect. But actually, there is a band in Northern Ireland, and I don't understand completely the whole technology around solar, but there is a band that Northern Ireland actually, although we are more northerly, we are more attractive than even other parts of Great Britain, which are north as well. That's the evidence I've been told us, but it does make here attractive for solar.
And then finally, just can you break down for me the level of compensation return that you're allowing for here, in terms of how much has been apportioned to planning, how much has been apportioned to delays in connection to the grid? And you're clearly saying this must be compensated, but and if you can also explain to me what the phrase means, the relative immaturity of larger scale solar in Northern Ireland. I would have thought the technology is the same no matter where you put it.
Yes, although we have none of it here at all.
No, I know that, but that's not. You're not making the point there that it wouldn't work here because the technology is the same as what it is in Britain, or
no? But I think
what is the point there?
The point there is it's new to the planners. It's new to maybe the construction sector here, working on that. Nobody has done large-scale ground-mounted solar in Northern Ireland before, so it is new from that sense. Not from, you're quite right, the technology.
Why should it be compensated for then?
Because I think we have done this before, Chairman, in terms of anaerobic digestion, where we give a higher ROC level for anaerobic digestion to kickstart that market here. Again, that technology isn't new, but it was very, very new to Northern Ireland, and we enhanced the ROC level for AD, and that has brought that on substantially here.
So it's to attract them here rather than compensate for any immaturity of the...
It's to give developers here the same rate of return that they would, for example, in Great Britain.
Right now, and I do know because I'm aware of a major project, and I believe you've been speaking to the developer as well, in terms of that one went through the planners there with relative ease.
Yes.
So, in fact, as quickly as you would almost get a single dwelling in the countryside passed, without the usual issues with regard to objectors or anything like that. So I think it was, 3 months from beginning to end. So if planning service is being efficient, in that case with Venture, it's been very efficient, how are you compensating for a perceived inefficiency that's not there?
Inefficiency is a word, Chairman, that you would use. I wouldn't use inefficiency. I think it's the process here in Northern Ireland to go from...
Sorry, it's specifically referred to here as longer lead-in times.
Yes, so the longer lead-in times would be from planning through to actual grid connection. And what developers have said to us that in Britain they might get from putting in a planning application to actually connecting in approximately 6 months. The process in Northern Ireland could see that 15 months, typically even longer. So that's when the degradation that we have becomes an issue. If we were to have the same degradation levels that they have in Great Britain, and degradation is there because the cost of technology is coming down, but our process takes longer. That actually, if we were to have the same degradation levels, it wouldn't make a significant enough return for a project to go ahead.
Sorry, I'm just working on the facts as I know them, and I'm not hearing from you specifically how that's broken down. You've raised an issue here, you've raised points, you've raised reasons as to why I can hear the issue around radiation, but you did include the longer lead-in times for planning approval and grid connection. And the practical experience of one major development has been that there was no longer lead-in time for planning approval. In fact, it was dealt with extremely efficiently. So how are you compensating for something which practical experience for major development of 27 acres has shown has been very efficient?
They've been, the developers have been saying to us, actually taking, 3 months, they've been saying to us, if they could even get it through in 6 months, they would be surprised here to get it through in 6.
The reality is that this one was through in 3 months. So why are you compensating for something that's really a perceived issue whenever the reality is that it's not an issue?
I think the problem then is, Chairman, in Britain you can apply for your grid connection at the same time that you apply for your planning application. Here you must have your planning before you then start the grid application. You can't just start that grid application, so that adds on that longer time scale. It does take longer to get a grid application here as well.
So it's not the planning is the problem, it's the grid?
I think I've said in that consultation response, it's both of those give that longer lead-in time.
I'm not convinced by that, but anyway, Mr. Frew, Paul.
Yeah, just a quick question, Chair. With regards to the ROCs, and I understand the whole concept of ROCs and incentivising the market, but is the decision made by DETI on a level of ROC purely on the rate of return for the developer?
It will be made on a number of factors. It will be the attractiveness of that technology to our wider energy mix, that we don't have that as well. Small scale, if you take the case of small scale, where we increased ROC levels several years ago, that was to try and bring forward more of small scale. In this case with solar, really gives us that wider mix. This committee will be aware that there's a growing opposition to wind. There's no doubt about that. Not everybody likes wind farms. Solar does have that. It doesn't have the same visual impact that wind would have. So it does have an attractiveness for us in terms of what it can give to our energy mix.
Yes, and again, I agree entirely with your concept with regards to growing resentment and opposition to large-scale wind farms. I see it every day in my own constituency. But do you add into that mix the issues around other issues like, let's take for instance an example of anaerobic digestion, whereby if you place a large-scale anaerobic digester, it could well affect the price of land, could well affect the price of foliage that feeds it. And you could then see a change in even farming practices, whereby foliage would have been used for feed, it's now been used to feed a machine. You could look at the PV industry, where they would need large swathes of land to put in a large-scale PV plant. That would affect maybe a farmer's single-farm payment, for instance, where that would have to come off his land.
Oh, you can still get it.
You could also, there's other issues whereby should a farmer use that land for this, or is it should be used for food production? So do you look at all those issues in the round when trying to incentivise? There is another issue around even the single-use turbines, whereby the farming community who looked for RDP grants and then get ROCs also. There's state aid issues there if you try and sell back to the grid. So RDP funding was only on the condition that you use it for your own land, your own business. So all these issues could well change even the farming or business practices.
And one thing I've learned in this job is that there always seem to be unintended consequences, that no matter what we do, and we saw that with the 4 ROCs when they were brought in, were very well supported at the time, and everybody thought this was a great idea, and then we start to see issues around planning, we start to see issues around grid that were never, to be honest, foreseen as being up, because nobody actually foresaw the uptake and how popular it would be. Solar, my understanding, even if you take the one that was approved yesterday, that land that's on is still used for grazing. It wasn't land that was used for crops. Some of these developers are looking at disused airfields as well for putting them on. And I can understand the attractiveness that it would be to a farmer, particularly if it's a bit of land that isn't producing any income for them. We did raise the point about the single farm payment with developers as to what the impact that would be with farms, and that had been discussed with farmers, and they knew that there were possible implications there if they did choose to go down that route. But I mean, I think that's a commercial decision that farmer would make.
Just on another question then, we have large swathes of land in Northern Ireland that are sitting in the hands of the executive, the OFM, DFM, large swathes of land. One I'm thinking about is the site in Ballykelly.
Mm-hmm.
You then have also even St Patrick's site in Ballymena. You have other old Army barracks land,
sure.
MOD land. Is there any sort of discussion or thought process there whereby you could actually base what would be an even larger scale industrial plant on these sites and still have ample space and room for other
I'm not privy to direct discussions, but I understand there have been discussions with developers about using land as such as you described for that, and at least one of the solar developers has been in discussion, I think, with Strategic Investment Board about that.
Right, okay. Thank you.
Okay, just you touched on it, the issue of Conacre and the land, and Paul, you led us into it there too. Are you aware of how much they give per acre for the rental of the land?
I don't know per acre, Chairman. No, I wouldn't know that directly. I could try and find that out for you, but no, I wouldn't have that figure.
Because it has been mooted that it can be upwards of £400 an acre, so which is pretty high.
Mm-hmm.
So if people, where I'm going with that is, if it is as much as that, and people are paying up to £400 an acre, do not think they could renegotiate that down a bit and lop off some of their costs there?
In terms of anaerobic digestion?
No. I'm talking about PV.
About PV.
Because obviously you have seen the advertisements in the Farming Life for that, I presume. Have you?
I haven't, no.
Right, okay. From some of the PV companies. I think most other people are aware of that. Could you check that out, could you, for us, please?
Yeah.
Okay. Mr. Flanagan, Phil.
Thanks, Patsy, and Michael, thanks for coming along. Can I get you to go over the rationale for this at all, because I'm not really sure what the point of it is?
The point to us, as I said before, large solar was never part of what we would have envisaged ever being here, and the majority of our target will be met through wind. We understand that. But now we're finding, as the cost of PV has come down, and I can understand, well, if the cost of PV has come down, why are we giving a higher ROC level? The cost of PV has come down significantly over the last 2 years, which is partly why we're seeing, if you take it at the other level, at the small scale, such a massive uptake of small solar here in Northern Ireland. It is now making Northern Ireland a viable economic proposition for putting large-scale solar in. So developers are coming to us, but the point they're making to us is that there are different conditions in Northern Ireland that make that less attractive than they could do this in Great Britain. One of these companies has Northern Ireland, well, they're London-based, has Northern Ireland people direct at a senior level who are very keen to invest in Northern Ireland. There is apart from 100 to maybe 200 megawatts, depending on who you talk to, that would make a significant contribution to our 40% targets. It's not wind. It is, has less visual impacts. As I mentioned, that is £50 million or more that we could be bringing in directly into the Northern Ireland economy. And to be honest, I think it would be difficult of us to ignore that.
Sorry, you mentioned a figure of £50 million. What's that £50 million for, just please?
That's excluding the cost of the panels, which obviously aren't bought in Northern Ireland, but that is the cost of the construction, the ongoing maintenance of those sites, the land rental, and companies are saying in the future, they will have to be paying business rates. They expect in the future, so they're factoring in about £50 million directly to here for that.
Over what period of time?
That would be 50 million would bring in 100 megawatts. If they expect those 100 megawatts to come in by 2017, so over that relatively short period, although ongoing maintenance. These stations would be in place for 20 plus years, so they're factoring in that.
Hopefully you're not anticipating that we invest in something that's going to require huge amounts of maintenance costs.
No, my understanding is they don't need a lot of maintenance. Once solar is up and running, it doesn't need significant.
Yeah, maintenance is good for the sparking industry.
It is indeed. Any opportunities there? Get a wee grant for
You never know what I might be doing.
Sorry, Phil.
Did he say copper opportunities?
You weren't finished off, were you?
I think it was.
Right. Are you planning to put the levels of incentivisation up or down?
The levels that came in last year were a reduction on what used to be 2 rocks for large-scale solar. Last year, the figures that came in brought that down, reduced it down to 1.5 rocks.
Okay.
What we're proposing is to 1.6. Okay, because the figures that we brought in last year were the levels that went in across all of the UK. Because at that time, we had no evidence to suggest anything different for Northern Ireland.
But John, a point of clarification, you also suggest of changing it every year, though?
No, not every year. It changes depending on when you come in. So while this year in 2014-15, the rock level we're proposing is 1.6 rocks, next year it would be 1.5 for somebody new coming in. The following year would be 1.4. So it would digress because we expect the cost of the technology to reduce over the next couple of years.
Sorry about that.
Okay, you're all right. The 5 respondents, what was their view on the proposal?
3 of the responses were from developers who did give us quite detailed evidence and comparisons. One was from Northern Ireland Electricity, which set out their timescales and the rationale for their timescales, and the other was from Northern Ireland Environment Link, who were supportive of solar PV, but mindful of any impacts on land use.
Right, so the 3 developers that responded, what did they say?
They give us different figures, and in fact I think the consultation response, we don't allocate who give what figure, but they put in their suggested rock levels, which were all higher actually than what we had consulted on, and actually we have gone for the one which has been the lowest, which is also the one we think will bring forward the most. We don't expect then all of those who came to us with those levels to maybe progress with investment, because some were saying unless we have a higher level, it just wouldn't work here in Northern Ireland.
Well, Lighthouse had approached us some time ago as a committee, concerned that there was such a differential in the level of incentivisation here compared with Britain, and I suppose that's part of the reason you have made these changes. But the rationale that developers give and that you have provided us with as to why there needs to be an increase in the levels of incentivisation were it takes 6 months in Britain to get a planning application passed, and it might take 15 months here. You see, instead of putting consumers' bills up to sort this problem out, it would not be easier to sort the planning problem out? Because what happens if you increase incentivisation, but yet somehow we get a political agreement to sort the planning problems out? Will developers continue to receive the proposed higher rate of incentivisation and not have to go through these barriers?
I think the bigger issue than planning is grid. It's the length of time to actually get grid as opposed to planning. I mean, planning has got better, and planners do have a better understanding of even of solar.
We'll take the two issues. Take the issue of planning and take the issue of NIE allowing people to connect to the grid. Would it not be easier for DETI to try and sort those out instead of talking about increasing the levels of incentivisation?
Yes, and we work with NIE. I'm supposed to actually been at an NIE grid workshop this morning that is being held, looking at how these processes can be streamlined. And it's an NIE decision that they will not accept a grid application until they have a planning application. And my understanding for their rationale for that is because it stops speculative bids and applications and would just massively increase their load. So that's why NIE has taken that decision. It's not we do have discussion. It's not something we can make them change. Can understand.
Who can make them change it?
Well, I think my understanding is it's a process that NIE can have the decision over. I honestly don't know if it's something the regulator can enforce on NIE or not, but it's one that they say that it's the only way it will work for them. If they were to remove, they have a queue process, so if that was to suddenly change overnight, you would have a flood of additional applications, which isn't going to actually speed up that process any quicker for them.
And in all of your discussions with NIE, do you get the feeling that they're overstating the extent of the problem?
No, I don't.
So we're no closer to sorting out this problem with NIE, because it's one of the issues we're trying to look at into our continuing inquiry into prices. And one of the things we're looking at is how renewable generators are incentivised. And from all of the information we've seen, they're being far too heavily rewarded for renewable energy. It's not just wind. It's an awful lot of them. Their price continues to rise as the price of fossil fuels increases, but yet you're proposing to give them greater incentivisation. And I'm interested to see how that fits into the legislation set out in the Energy Order of 2003, which gives the Department its responsibilities with regards to electricity policy. And the principal objective of the Department in carrying out the respective electricity functions is to protect the interests of consumers of electricity supplied by authorised suppliers by promoting effective competition. So how does trying to protect the interests of consumers fit with increasing the levels of incentivisation provided?
I think I mentioned the figure earlier of how much we think this will add to a bill. And this change, and going in terms of the difference between what came in last year and what we're proposing this year, will add a penny across all UK consumer bills. Actually, it will add less to Northern Ireland consumers because we have a lower obligation under the renewables obligation.
That's that one change you're making to the incentivisation?
Yes.
Right, but that 1 penny adds to another 9 million that maybe large energy users paying.
Yes, and what it will do is, but an extra 200 megawatts, we talk about security of supply as well. It gives us that. I don't think we could ignore not being able to take that additional renewable contribution here. I mean, I would assume the committee, if we had maybe turned our backs on 100 megawatts of renewables, would question us for doing that as well.
If you had what?
If we had not gone ahead with this incentivisation and ultimately that investment didn't come forward, and who knows whether it would or would not have come forward, but if it hadn't come forward, we had effectively been turning our back on that for that small additional cost.
But could you not try and sort out the other problems there are instead of changing the price people are paid?
Yes.
To me, that makes more sense, instead of increasing consumers' bills.
But I think that's a longer process that we here in the department have limited control over that overall, and how NIE practices work. That's something that would be more the regulator, and I'm not saying it's the regulator's issue, not the department's, but we have a limited influence over that.
But the department and the regulator have a joint function in this regard. Not that it's solely a matter for the regulator. The department have to be involved as well. Thanks, what's it?
In all of this, you're expecting us to go and wing a prayer, because these companies are not coming in here just to do the work pro bono. They obviously have their projections, they have they're set and making profits. And what I'm hearing from you is, to re-emphasise the point Phil made, we have to compensate for perceived shortcomings in other organisations out with control of your department. That's essentially what you're asking us to do. And you're asking us to make compensation in circumstances whenever one of those is a firm which is making very substantial profits itself too. It sounds a rather bizarre situation to me anyway, the logic of where the department has found itself in this one. Are you telling me that without this incentivisation, whether it's minor or not so minor, that this project isn't viable then? The project for PVs isn't viable?
That's what we have been told, yes.
No, but I didn't ask you that. I said, is that you're relaying, somebody could tell you it's a lovely day, it's snowing outside, and you could relay what they've told you, but what's the fact? Has the department done any research into this itself to establish if in fact that is the reality? These are companies who are going to make money.
Yes.
But what has the department done to establish if that is the hard reality, as opposed to repeating to us what you've been told?
No, what we did, we worked with the Department of Energy and Climate Change in London, who have a solar PV team and have a solar PV strategy. We have shared these figures with them, who have the expertise there to guide us as well, and because they've done a lot of work recently on solar PV. We have our own in-house economists as well who have looked at the figures. We haven't just taken the figures for granted.
Just so that you know, Northern Ireland Electricity, we've just looked it up here, their pre-tax profit for 2012 was up 202%. So that's just fact, to throw that out there. So we're being asked to compensate for shortcomings in a private company. Isn't that where you're taking us?
Well, my purpose of doing this is trying to get that 100 to 200 megawatts of large-scale solar PV into Northern Ireland that will contribute to our targets, will enhance our security of supply at least cost to the consumer, and that's what I'm trying to do in my job.
No, I hear where you're coming from. It's just that I don't hear the rationale for it in detail as I would have expected. So we have Mr. Agnew, Stephen.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the information so far, Michael. I understand where the Chair and Deputy Chair have come from and some of this in terms of ensuring we're not over-incentivising, and I think that's important, but we have some basic facts. Under 1.5 ROCs, did we have any large-scale renewable projects come online?
At 1.5?
Yeah.
No.
We've increased it to 1.6 and we're now getting large-scale renewable projects online.
Yes, what they had said was at 1.5, and this area is so fine in terms of what makes a project viable or not. They've said it's not viable at 1.5 here in Northern Ireland, but is at 1.6. But it is coming down to those points of a rock that are making the difference. And the information that we have from them, Chairman, sets out the difference in terms of what that makes to the bottom line for those projects.
As they've told you?
Yes, and as we have shared with, say, DEC in London, that they have their 900 megawatts of large-scale solar, so they're well. It's well established. They're well used to large-scale solar there, and we have checked these figures with them because we don't have that knowledge of large-scale here to make sure that what they're saying is correct and their projections are correct.
Sorry, Steve.
Right, yeah, no problem, Chair. You know, so yeah, I'll just repeat. For an under 1.5 rocks, we got no large scale come online. We increased it though.
And we've increased it
to 1.6.
Yes, the minimum that we can increase it to bring it forward.
Then we're proposing to go back down to 1.5 for 2015-16.
Yes.
You said because the price of PV coming down. I'd be interested in the evidence of that, because everywhere else we hear, I know as PV becomes a more mature technology across GB and these islands, there will be efficiencies of scale, but you know, transport costs are going up, electricity costs are going up, manufacturing costs, you know, everywhere else we hear costs are going up. What's the evidence to suggest that the cost of PV will go down, particularly year on year, which is what we're saying until 2017?
I think that's evidence that was gathered primarily through the banding review that was done last year, which saw that the rock level reduced from 2 rocks down to the 1.5. The majority of panels are made in China. And so a lot have come from the Chinese market, which is also why here we're seeing as I mentioned earlier, the massive increase in small-scale solar, and you start to see that more on domestic housing. The costs have come down rapidly. I think that they've come down significantly in the last 2 years, but I expect that is now slowing. And the industry itself acknowledges that it will continue to reduce as well over the next couple of years, but I think that's now going to start to flatten out, which is why those levels, I say, are supposed to take account of the fact that those costs will continue to reduce.
And so you'd be confident, maybe it's an unfair question, but you'd be confident that by going back down to 1.5, we won't return to the situation whereby it becomes unviable again?
No.
Okay. A related point, and it's not what we asked you here for, so if you don't have the answer, I fully accept that. But we've got the issue with small-scale PV in Northern Ireland. We're seeing these free PV offers to households come online, and I suppose I'll declare an interest. I'm getting my house assessed for it at the minute. But to me, that seems something that's good for certainly the consumers that avail of it, and obviously the industry, and indeed ourselves in terms of our renewable targets. But obviously we have a problem in Northern Ireland with mortgage providers who are uncertain about this. Is that something the department's working on? Because I know it doesn't appear to be a problem in GB with the situation. My bank, my building society, I should say, my mortgage with is a problem in Northern Ireland, but not in GB, which I haven't got to the bottom of. But you know, they're operating in GB. They're happy to put these on, and then in Northern Ireland, they're going, we're not so sure. How much work is the department doing on that?
Yes, we're aware of that, and it is an issue we've been in contact with the Council of Mortgage Lenders about. And yes, the understanding is that the guidance in Great Britain, or certainly in England and Wales, and I think it's different in Scotland again, is different to here in Northern Ireland. And this is when it comes down to the free solar, as opposed to those you're putting on. And the issue seems to be there that some mortgage lenders are uncomfortable with panels being put on the roofs of mortgage properties in terms of what the impact that could have in the future for the saleability of that property. Some people might find it attractive to have a property with solar on it, and some might not. So some lenders, not all lenders, and it really, the Council of Mortgage Lenders have said to us that actually, I mean, they don't impose it one way or another. It'll be up to individual lenders. I have to say, seeing the amount of accreditations that we are seeing coming through on the rocks, while it may be an issue, it doesn't seem to be an insurmountable issue, because the number of accreditations have just snowballed. I can give you an idea of how those figures have increased.
Well, we need to go into that. We just maybe stick with the issue here under us at the moment. So, Stephen, did you have anything further to add?
No, that's me. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Mr. McKinney, fair enough.
I'd just like to return to the issue that the Chair and Deputy Chair have been pushing on. On paragraph 210 on page 34, the last sentence. Can you just explain the consultation response? Yeah. Can you just explain that for me in relation to what you've been saying about the other elements of consultees responses?
Sorry, what page are you on, Fred?
Sorry, page 34, paragraph 210, the last sentence. Several respondents noted that planning and grid application can be undertaken.
Yes.
Does that mean that there was a divergence of views among the consultees about
No, sorry. What I was trying to explain there was why the NGB, well, those that responded on this noted that planning and grid can happen in parallel, so you can submit both together, while here you can't. It has to be done consecutively.
Yes, understand. Earlier on, you did play down the planning lead in response to Mr. Flanagan's questions. You played down the lead in planning element and emphasised instead the grid. So, in other words, at least as, in regards to your evidence here today, on the one hand, you've said in paragraph 8, page 24 here of the overall proposal, that there's the longer lead-in times and grid connection, were, if you like, equally responsible for your conclusions. But your evidence today has played down the lead-in time and emphasised the grid connection. That's what I'm hearing.
Yes, and what planners, or sorry, what developers saying was planning was an issue for them. And,
but I'm just really relying on the evidence that you've given today. Would you accept, in some respects, that the consultees would say that, wouldn't they?
Yes, they would, of course, and you would expect them to say that. But we would know from dealing with other renewable technologies that planning and even take wind as one can take a considerable amount of time here and can take a lot longer than it would in Great Britain.
Would you accept that there perhaps would be a need for further interrogation of this issue, given that the Chair is reflecting on the speed of planning, you're reflecting on it not as being an equal issue, and that there could be further discussions with NIE and others around grid connection?
We've had discussions certainly with NIE on the grid connection issue, and the NIE response, which I'll happily share with the committee, does set out the reasons why they do have very long lead-in times for these. So grid might take 6 months, and that wouldn't be untypical, and 3 months, Chairman, is fast for any planning application, I would suggest here. It's the grid bit can take up to 2 years, they're saying, for some of these projects to get through.
Forgive my ignorance here. Is NIE behind any of the plans for the development of the farms themselves?
Not that I'm aware of. No.
Good point. But back to my point, would you accept there's a need for further interrogation of this in relation to, given that there are now, just in the base of this conversation, and other, albeit anecdotal evidence, that there should be some further work done around this, because it appears to me to be throwing up more questions that should not be accepted as just issues to be resolved with a ROC increase.
I think on planning for solar PV, there are, I think there maybe are very few of those actually in the planning system. So this is the first that's come out the other end. So we don't have a lot of evidence yet to be able to see how long they take. We can discuss further with the planners how long they think these will take. But that is part of the issue, is planning, but it doesn't get away from the grid aspect of it, unfortunately, which is probably the larger and longer part of it.
But you didn't answer my question. Do you think there's further interrogation to be done on this?
Yes, we can look at it. I'm not sure that there's enough yet evidence for us to base any decision on in terms of how long they're taking, because we only have one through at the minute. But we can look at that again.
Okay, thank you.
Following it through on what we've heard here today, and I'm not comfortable with making any sort of a recommendation on this, because there are a few issues there, as we've drilled down into them, there are a few issues there which are a wee bit nebulous at the moment. And we're getting that feel around the committee here. Issues such as the potential for planning. I would like to know, has the department shared these concerns about the ROCs with DOE, and if so, have they responded with regard to that? We mentioned earlier there, you mentioned in fact that NIE had responded to you, I would think it appropriate that the committee have sight of that response too, please. And Mr. Wright, you referred to PV prices coming down and how those were dropping, and certainly I would like to know something about that because I don't know about it. If you have evidence that you can share with the committee on that, that would be very helpful. And also the issue around land prices and Conacre, if you have looked into that, because there's not much point of an over-incentivisation happening at one side and then a further incentivisation happening over at this side. So I think we would need to have a wider picture. I'm sure other members would like, if there are any further issues that we would need to have on this.
Can I just ask the ramifications of holding this up?
Well, it will create that investor uncertainty. We weren't expecting any investment to come through in 2014-15 because of the long lead-in times. Nothing was expected to come through until the following year. This was due to go into the Renewables Obligation Amendment Order, which comes into place on the 1st of April 2014. So that's where that was going to set out those ROC levels. So I would assume that it will create that uncertainty, that we're not going to go ahead with it.
How do you make that assumption? Because the onus is upon you to provide the committee with the detail that we require to make the decision.
Yes, sorry, I'm basing it just on if they didn't go ahead. I'm just trying to...
All right, okay.
More about the cogs of the process rather than the mood of the industry and the perception of the industry. What's the mechanisms here for us? What decision do we have to do? As a committee, do we hold it up for seeking more clarification, more information? What impact on the cogs does that have?
Okay, the other part of the order is on biomass sustainability, which is being introduced across all three renewables obligations. So the order itself, if the actual text of the order is mainly all around the biomass sustainability requirements, and that's bringing in reporting criteria on biomass users, really to show where they are importing fuel stock, or what, not even importing, what fuel stock they're using, be it biomass or AD. It puts reporting requirements on those, and ultimately for stations over 1 megawatt, if they don't comply with those requirements, they could have ROCs withheld until they do. So that part of it, if we didn't progress that, it would put us out of step, certainly with the other two renewables obligations, if we didn't do that part of it.
Yes, but just on this point...
You didn't do it, but...
Yeah, but how long does the committee have before it impacts on your work programme to get these SL1s into operation? Is the question. The actual cogs.
Sure.
Do we have 2 weeks to assess this further? Do we have 1 week? Should we be passing it now in order to make you do your work in time for April?
I would certainly. Our schedule would have us having the order led in draft by the beginning of March, with a view to having, because this is draft affirmative, so there's a debate to have that before the end of March to allow the order to come into operation on the 1st of April.
So
there's probably
just on that, because you've asked very valid points, Chair. I don't know how long this has been scheduled for, or how long we've been waiting for it. You've all valid questions, I know, but some of those issues are not in the destiny or in the remit of DETI.
Yes.
So I don't know. We could hold DETI to hostage on issues that they have no real remit on. I would worry about that. All very valid questions, I know. And one other valid question is the progress of the work being undertaken by the Department on the European Regional Development Fund in order to enhance investment in the grid. So that could be a pertinent question that we could ask the Department on this issue, because again, it is. Some of the issues are centred on the grid and the investment in the grid.
Right.
But this is a short-term. Whilst DETI, and I suppose we all would like NIE to put more investment into the grid and make it more readily available for renewable energies, the ROCs, the changes and variations in the ROCs is a short-term hit to manipulate the issues and to incentivise the market. the issue around the grid is going to be a long-term strategy and a long-term issue to resolve. So, although we can connect it together because we want it resolved, we need to be careful that we don't de-incentivise the market and make things worse. So I would urge caution.
I think as a committee, we want to be as best informed to make any decision, good, bad or indifferent, as it may be perceived out there. That's our job. That's why we're here. So, Phil, you had wanted to make a comment.
I think this all comes down to risk. And, I think there's a reluctance within the wider public service to take risks with taxpayers' money, and that's not really a view I share. I think that's an attitude we can need to get rid of. But I think when it comes to electricity bills and actually the amount of money that domestic and business consumers will spend on their electricity bills, I think we have to be very careful about taking a risk here. And I know it might only be a very small amount of money you're talking about, but it all comes together to make a significant difference. So I'm not convinced by the arguments you've given me, to be honest with you, but I don't know enough about it, and that's the problem. I'm here with an open mind, willing to be convinced, and I'm willing for you to sell it to me, but I'm not buying it. I'm concerned that it would have a detrimental impact on consumers' bills with very little benefit for them. So that's what I'd like you to do, is to actually come back and sell it to us properly, if you can. The other point that I want you to come back and cover is the whole issue around technology costs and the EU-China trade dispute, which has led to a minimum price level for Chinese panels being sold in Europe. That's something that constituents have raised with me about a potential opportunity, but it's not something I know anything about. Does the Department have any information on that, or would we be better getting Assembly Research to get us information on it?
We won't have any direct information on it, but that is one of the the reasons why panel prices they have dropped quite dramatically. But then that is slowed while this is going on. I understand that's the hope to be resolved later this year. But I mean, I can provide the committee with more information on that.
Would we be better getting it from the department, or would research be fit to give us a more broader outlook on the whole thing?
Well, yes, if you want to get a researcher.
Get research.
I'm not sure about research. Best NI might have, I would hope.
Best NI would no knowledge about European Union trade import limits.
Oh, sorry, I thought you were talking about the price of the PV panels.
Yeah, but it's importing them from China.
Oh, no,
importing them, not exporting.
Oh, I know that. Aye.
But Best NI wouldn't know anything about it.
Well, surely their client companies here would have raised it with them. If they haven't, then it's a bigger problem.
I think research will give us a better assessment of it, hopefully quicker too.
So, on that point, they've raised a number of issues there. If you could get back to us on that, and that's clearly in your interest to get back as soon as possible.
Absolutely. Just a wee squeeze,
yes,
just squeezed in. What are we talking about in value? What is 0.1 of a rock?
0.1 of a rock in terms of
it all depends on many developments.
Well, a rock is, I mean, typically a rock is worth about, and the value can vary, but about 40 to 45 pounds.
In this issue of on this issue on TV.
Well, what I calculate is that by making the increase of 0.1 of a rock, that actually, if 50 megawatts came on board because of that, that would be an additional £400,000 over and above if we hadn't increased the rock level.
Is this per annum?
Yes, per annum.
400,000 per annum.
Yes, okay, per annum. So that's £400,000. Cost spread across all UK consumers, so 26.4 million consumers.
Which we're what, 2% of?
Well, of which then that works out at, that's where the penny comes from. But it's less for Northern Ireland consumers because we've got a lower obligation level. So suppliers here, the obligation on them is they have to buy less rocks. Chairman. So it's less than a penny.
That's grand. Well, thanks very much for your presentation anyway. And we look forward. So we look forward to getting your further details from. Okay, thank you now. All right, members. So we wait until we get further word about the SL1 before we make our considered view on it. Okay, we move on then to agenda item number 7, which is matters rising, and these are included in the papers on page 40 onwards. Okay, Page 41, we have a response from the Department to a follow-up query by the Committee on how the Department is making businesses aware of the exemptions listed under the Combined Heat and Power Quality Assurance Programme. The Committee had considered the Department's previous response and asked them to consider the question further and provide a response which addressed the level of take-up by businesses in the North on the exemptions listed under that programme. So, that received a member's consent to note. Read.
I have no idea what we discussed on the 20th of November.
What?
I have no idea what we discussed on the 20th of November.
That was the take-up. Yes, that was the take-up of the these exam. Do you remember? I think it was actually yourself last.
Aye, but it's that long ago. I've no idea. It's 3 months ago. You know, usually response within
that's your point.
days.
Aye. It was basically saying were the Department making companies and businesses aware of these exemptions that they could avail of.
Sorry, Chair, the committee did consider the response and then asked a further follow-up question.
Okay.
So this is the response to the follow-up question.
Right. Okay.
Right.
Really, you should be keeping up.
All right. Right. Now, next item at page 43 then, we have a response from the Department addressing the Committee's query as to the rationale for bringing the Consumer Rights Bill legislation through a legislative consent motion in Westminster rather than through legislation in the Assembly, and whether this has any impact on the statutory role of the Consumer Council. The update from the Minister, which was considered at the meeting on the 16th of January, is included in tabled papers to ask members if they have anything further about that. Okay.
Well, I think that was we were given a legislative consent motion to approve, or were we told there's going to be one coming?
No, they said there was one.
There will be a legislative consent motion.
But we weren't
giving it to us to approve it.
Okay. Right.
But it's to ask at this stage if members are content with the proposals.
There's very little else we can do.
Back to the last case, Jim, hasn't been sold to me well enough. Still not convinced of the benefits. I think in terms of devolved matters like consumer affairs, I think we're better coming up with our own legislation instead of leaving it in the hands of people in London. And when a bill hasn't even been finalised, still only a draft stage. I think on issues like this, we're much better dealing with the bills.
Well, the only other way around is to have officials come before us and explain it then, Phil, in more detail, because we get backwards and forwards with letters to and fro and all the time,
And poor old Jim's getting tight to factor in oral briefings here too.
Right. Do you want an oral briefing on this, or not? Are you prepared to let it go here today?
But if we let it go, what's going to happen then? Are they going to come forward?
That's back at you. Are you proposing that we have an oral briefing?
Well, I think we should consider it in some way. You think an oral briefing's the best way?
I think we can backwards and forwards with letters and we'll never get anywhere with it,
I'll ask your MPs to, it's going through legislation in Westminster, to do something on it. An amendments, things like that,
I got you.
Things that MPs usually do.
And by the way, Patsy,
yes.
Your own former leader, who is now an MP for the constituency of Foyle,
yes,
put out a very detailed press statement expressing his concerns with the Consumer Rights Bill. And the deficits with it, so you might take a look at that and then.
Sure, we should make a representation to him, is what you're saying.
You're asking the SDLP. You're asking the SDLP to do the work.
What I'm saying is he's saying the bill is not good enough.
Right.
Why should we accept a bill that's not good enough when we have the power to bring in our own?
Right, fair enough.
From my point of view.
Right. I want to bring this to a conclusion.
I'm not impressed with it.
We can always lobby our MPs on it.
We're the Evolution Party. Thought the resties were too.
No, we are, but we represent people elsewhere too.
He's on his own, talking about him.
Right, can we, right, now.
There's no backup.
Look, we want to bring this, we don't want to be talking about this all day. We'll have the officials in then to field the questions as we hear from them, okay?
Yeah,
Read.
Bring on.
Now, Programme for Government, page 45, a response from the Department to the Committee's request for information on what's been done to address the issue of increased connection costs for small generators due to the need to upgrade lines to accommodate generation. Okay, that's at page 45. Okay, now.
Chair, on this is the point I raised no more than 10 minutes ago.
The ERDF stuff.
Yeah, the European Regional Development Fund. We need to see where that is, because that could well have an impact on how we advance the grid. Utility regulator, the onus is on her. with regards to this and the debate and the tension between that office and the NIE, and then of course the Competition Commission. If there is time in our work schedule at some point in the next couple of weeks, months, it would maybe be better to have the utility regulator up to discuss this very serious issue of grid investment.
Can we discuss this as part of the review later?
I think she's due to come up and see it. Anyway, yes. Yes, we can.
Discuss part of the review later?
As normal form, we would have the utility regulator up to see us periodically anyway.
Yes, well, if that's the case, then it could be on the agenda.
And it might be useful to get an update from the department. It says the department is examining how further investment in the grid can be supported on the ERDF. Yes. Presumably they're just doing a bit of a scoping exercise at the moment, but as and how that progresses, if we could have an update on it. Okay, great. Next item, Fermanagh Trust Department of Energy and Climate Change Community Energy Strategy. Corresponds from Laurie McCusker, Chief Executive Fermanagh Trust, as a follow-up to his briefing on the 23rd of January. That's at page 46. And the Department of Energy and Climate Change has since launched the Community Energy Strategy, which the Fermanagh Trust welcomes and is delighted the Northern Ireland Executive has been fully engaged in its development. Unless members any further comment on that, content to note.
Send it on to the department, I suppose, no way?
Yeah, we can.
Frame it, put it in the wall.
Excuse me, sorry. A bit of wind energy there. The social enterprise.
You get rocks for it?
Indeed.
As long as it's not anaerobic digestion in it.
It was indeed. Incentivisation there, all right. Social Enterprise Incubation Hubs project at page 48. We have a response from the Department to the Committee's request for further information on the Hubs project following correspondence from the Committee of OFMD-FM, which the Committee considered at our meeting on the 16th of January. Unless members have anything further to comment on this, can we forward it on to the Committee for Social Development for information? Reid?
Committee for OFMD-FM got this? We sent it to them as well? No, I don't think they have it. No, they don't have it. We sent it to them as well?
Well, we can, yes. Reid? Yes. Okay. Next item, DETI consultation document, future arrangements for consumer representation in Northern Ireland. At page 50, we have a response from the Department in regard to the DETI consultation document, future arrangements for consumer representation in Northern Ireland. The response addresses firstly the Department's views and corresponds by the Interim Chief Executive of the Northern Ireland Consumer Council, Aidan O'Donnell, and secondly the Department's response to Mr Wright, retired Financial Manager, who raised concerns the Committee stands towards the review and asked for a range of information. Now, this is really, we've been copied into this correspondence both to Aidan and to Mr Wright in regard to the issues that they raised, so are we content to note these?
Yeah. Can I just make a point on that,
yes,
Chair? You probably heard this morning's news about the 285,000 that
superb work
that the Consumer Council was able to win back for Altnagelvin Hospital, and that's a direct win for taxpayers.
They're to be congratulated
and
for it.
underscores the valuable role of the Consumer Council at a time when its future is under threat from DETI, and I just think it's something that we need.
Well, I think we should formally congratulate them on their work done there, given the scale of it. So, if members are agreed, we send them a note to congratulate them on their work.
And to win that kind of money back, I mean, this becomes
big stuff.
If you like, a bit of self-financing as well, and I think it should be taken into consideration by the authorities in terms of their review.
Just on that, Chair, it's good to have a consultation on our review on bodies or government bodies or arm's length bodies. So, it's a wee bit strong to say they're under threat. They're currently going through a review as to the best practice and what should be done in the future. So,
have you got a good authority that we find them?
See if you can say today they're not under any threat, Paul.
No, well, they're under a review.
Good.
And we need to ensure.
Okay, can we move on? We have a lot of
best
stuff to get
practice.
through here because there's another committee due in at 2 o'clock.
There's another
Thanks
problem,
for that.
Patsy. That letter was sent to Aidan on the 16th of December. We're only getting it now.
I saw that, aye. Don't know what the efficiencies are there, but perhaps the good man at the back could take note of that.
I'm sure he will.
Could I remind members that last week's meeting we had agreed to put forward a motion for debate in plenary regarding the financial assistance for the credit union movement, and on page 58 is the draft motion for members' consideration. So here we have it at page 58. This is the motion for consideration by way of debate. So could members just take a wee minute and see is that grand with, and is there any way they want to amend it or change it before it's submitted by Jim on our behalf here?
I think, Patsy, when the opening sentiments needs to be expresses support for the good work of the credit unions or something bland to get, you know? Instead of just calling for somebody to do something. Those need to warm the whole people up, you know?
Should we...
Use the F word.
I'm just thinking there in terms of we're calling on the Minister to do that, Minister of Enterprise. There is a read across here with the Minister of Finance and Personnel as well. Should we incorporate him into the body of that, Jim?
Talked about executive colleagues.
Aye.
Part of the...
I think, Chair, normally in debate you're asking for one minister to respond, so
Right,
if you put in to work with executive colleagues, that should cover it.
Okay.
I noticed that you do refer to vulnerable, but I think it's should there be a more specific reference, given some of the debate last week was around those who have extortionate lending rates? Is that the vulnerable covered there?
I think that covered could be expanded on in the debate.
Well, fair enough.
Aye.
If you think.
No, we could. Right, are members happy enough for the motion?
You put
With
in
the
something
exception
wanted
of-
at the start about supporting the credit unions or welcoming in their contribution to something or other. Yeah.
Agreed?
Great.
Okay.
Okay, so what would members like in then? Because if...
Whatever you decide, Jim, we'll back you to the hill.
You're acknowledging the valuable contribution of the credit union movement, and then bump.
And providing affordable credit.
Yeah.
Address your point.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Right.
Sorry, just to get this right. The committee acknowledges the valuable contribution of the credit union movement in providing affordable credit.
The Assembly now, Jim, not the
You credit them for providing.
Okay. Can we move on then? That's grand, Jim. Are you okay with that? Aye?
Certainly, yes.
That's great. Thank you. Now, move on to the next item. Northern Ireland Sub-Regional Data, a response from Dr. John Bradley. Page 59 is a response from Dr. Bradley, providing to the committee brief observations on the research paper which the committee forwarded to him. Now, he's quite a number of issues that he's raised here about the sub-regional data situation. Page 19, comprehensive data and aggregate Northern Ireland economy, absence of NI from the competitiveness. These issues that he has raised, I think could be important too, that whenever the department's in front of us, along with Invest NI, in a couple of weeks' time, that if we could add these various concerns that he has highlighted correctly to us, to the
What's the Department of Invest NI coming about?
Whatever we ask them to.
Aye, but you're asking them about grid connection, and now you're asking them about sub-regional economic data. Like, too broad.
But if people want to have another meeting with them, you know.
Chair, who is Dr. Bradley? Is this Dr. John Bradley taking issue with in relation to?
That's a research paper.
Hayden?
So, yeah. So is this back to the point that I raised it earlier on, and understanding the problem? You know, have we an issue here around actually how we really understand the problem? And if John raised the issue around data, and we're not somehow reflecting the depth of that, people, we won't be able to get to a point of solutions if we don't not only
if our own
know
research
the data. Well, I'm not being critical of that. That if there is a misunderstanding around just the core of the problem and how we get data, then we will never. The answers won't flow.
We give Aidan the right to reply to it. Do we give Aidan the right to reply to this letter?
I think we should.
No.
Ask him to reflect on it and come back to us with a few ideas.
Yeah.
Okay, fair point.
Or is that the
Professional
only,
courtesy.
did members want to do something
But
with the
there,
department?
there are still issues raised in that there about sub-regional data and the likes, and I still think whenever we have the department Invest NI in front of us, it would be remiss of us not to raise those. The Chamber of Commerce have a number of issues there today that we're going to have to raise with them. So it'll be a comprehensive session, and it'll be for members. We can divvy up the various areas of responsibility among members on that day.
Have we a second briefing that day? I'm just conscious
we
we
can't
go
do-
for a
we-
broader range of issues then.
We can't go into the required depth we need to.
Right, this is on the 20th of February, Chair, when Invest and I are up on the Chamber of Commerce report. Right, there's nothing yet scheduled.
Well, I think we should keep it, have a good session with them on all of these matters. So
Yeah, so keep
Okay.
it one session and
completely
then we
focused.
can keep them here for a long time.
That's right. Now, next item is agenda item number.
Sorry, Chair, before you move on,
Jim.
content to forward that correspondence from
To him.
Dr. Bradley to the department as well.
And to the department, yes. Thank you. Now,
And what about the, well, I suppose, will they send it to the Economic Advisory Group?
which economic advisory group?
Department's one?
The department, right.
Aye.
I presume it's for them to decide what they're going to do there with that. You would hope that.
Well, I'd like to start getting some information from the Economic Advisory Group on this whole issue of sub-regional economic data. So can we send it to them along with Aidan's research paper for their response?
Fair enough. And it might be, just to tease that one out, just Fergal, just bear with me. I presume that whoever is coming to respond that day around the issue of sub-regional data, I would hope that they should be informed by that economic advisory group. I would hope, whatever the process is within the department. Fergal, do you
I
want-
would just like to see that John and Aidan agree or concur in that before you move anything on to elsewhere. Otherwise, there are a number of different interpretations. Is that fair?
So
what? Sorry.
Right. We're still having the department up.
Yep.
Aidan's still going to review the response from John Bradley, and the department officials who will be there on that day hopefully will have tic-tac with their colleagues in the economic advisory group around the issue of sub-regional economic data. Right?
Well, so is sub-regional economic data one of the topics we're covering with the department that day?
Yes.
Well, then can we also make sure they have a copy of the NICFA report on it?
Okay. Okay. That's grand. Thanks for that. Now, agenda item number 8 is the Committee EU Priorities Committee response to the Committee for the Office of Deputy First Minister. These items are at page 61, and we had considered the OFM Committee's request at our meeting on the 6th. Sorry, that couldn't be possible. 16th of January, is it? 16th of February?
16th of January, Chair.
Yeah. Including the papers are, I was thinking there, easily sprang to mind OFM, DFM here, you know. Could be 16th of February last year or the year before. Including the papers is draft committee response from the clerk, a research paper from the OFM, DFM committee, which was considered by the committee on the 16th of January 2014. So Jim has put in quite a bit of work into this. So is there any further comments that any member has in regard to this or document before it's forwarded to the Committee for OFM DFM?
Jim, have you mentioned the Connecting Europe facility in there anywhere?
The what?
Connecting Europe facility, a €50 billion fund for transport, energy and telecoms. But every time we ask them what they're doing in telecoms, they go, we don't know yet.
Now, the response relates to the key areas that were brought up in the briefing paper from the OFM DFM committee in their briefing paper. So where would that fit in?
Europe? I have no idea.
Competitiveness?
Well, part of it would be the climate change section, and part of it would be other EU activity plan for 2014. I don't know whether that's just telling you what they're doing, but they're rolling out a €50 billion fund would be much addition. A €50 billion fund we split three ways between transport, telecoms and energy. And I know they're looking to try and get money for gas to the west from it, and probably grid connections, stuff like that. But in terms of telecoms, they're not really top of the game. But I'd like to be included in there somewhere, some reference to the Connecting Europe facility.
That the committee is going to consider this during 2014.
Oh, is that what this is about?
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's different. Not that sure about that, no. Well, I think we want the department to consider it.
This is the committee's priorities.
Right there on that's different. That's right. So order over now.
Okay, right. Well, not all right, but okay. Content then to forward the response over to OFMDFM. Agreed.
Well, can we see? There's a bit. Sorry, Pat. There's a bit in here. Scrutiny of the Detty Broadband Improvement Project. Can we just say scrutiny of Detty's implementation of the Connecting Europe facility on page 66?
Aye, what's that? Scrutiny of the Detty NI Broadband Improvement Project. In the context of?
Oh, well, that'd be two separate funds. The broadband money would come from ERDF, and the Connecting Europe facility is a
well, just add on and related EU funding sources.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Sorry, where's that then?
Page 66.
Scrutiny of Detty Broadband Improvement Project. Okay.
And scrutiny of Detty's efforts to attract funding from the Connecting Europe facility.
And sourcing of EU funds. Okay.
So, sorry, if I get this right, it can be forwarded. If I don't,
yes.
I feel I'd have to bring back to the committee next week. So the line should read scrutiny of the Detty NI Broadband Improvement Project and
attempts to draw down funding from the competitive Connecting Europe facility for energy and tourism. Telecoms.
We're not ruling out any other sources of funding there.
No, that's just
draw down funding from. Sorry.
Connecting Europe facility.
Right.
Okay. Grand. Can we move then to?
Thanks for that.
That finished. Yep. Aye. Okay. Agenda item number 9. Legislation SL1, the Control of Major Accident Hazards Amendment Order, Northern Ireland 2014. We have those included in the papers at page 70. Now, cover note there, the SL1 itself, subject to a negative resolution. The proposed date of operation is late February 2014. This is the committee's opportunity to consider the policy set out in the SL1, as it isn't possible to amend this once the rule has been made and laid out in the Assembly Business Office. So, are members content with the policy implications of it?
Once again, Patsy, I don't think we know enough about it.
Pardon?
I don't think we know enough about it. You know, all we've got is they're changing the categorisation from dangerous for the environment to petroleum products, which means that lower tier and top tier would increase from 100 tonnes to 2,500 and from 200 to 25,000. You know, if we're expected to make decisions as a committee, I think we need to know the rationale for it. You know, what evidence or what advice is that based on?
It seems to have been sprung on us, this one too. Is there any reason for a gym being so close to its proposed date of operation? We haven't considered this before, should we, Alan?
No, Chair.
No.
That's the point I would like to find out.
No, it's not that I'm against change, but as a committee, I'd like to know why we're making a decision, and I don't think that we're being given adequate information here.
Well, there's that to it, and the time for sufficient scrutiny and stuff. And
well, it's coming into effect at the end of February.
2 or 3 weeks away. Could we establish just first of all the reason for this being so late it's coming before the committee?
And it isn't just a categorisation, it has implications elsewhere in
Yes.
terms of major accident hazards.
Can we establish?
Sure, it is a fairly technical, it's typically one of those technical ones that has been implemented in order to comply with the EU directives. So,
and does the directive state that this is what has to happen? So, I don't read it saying that in there. But is this what does the EU directive state that this is what the categorisations now are?
Right. I think we need to get a wee bit more info on this. Well, first of all, establish why it's so late coming to us because of the 2012 EU directive. And secondly, if we could just get a bit of information, Sophia.
Implementation date's the 15th of February.
estimated that we'll be saving businesses £36,000 over a 10-year period.
Right. Bill, you're saying you're looking more information on it.
I don't think we know enough about it.
Well, I'm not bringing officials back up to deal with this one, can we?
I think a written briefing's plenty.
Aye.
No, if they'll explain to us, because they've told us that there's an EU directive here and they've given us code, but if that's what the EU directive says,
Okay,
that's
if we can get a wee bit more detail around the EU directive.
Right, sorry, what specifically?
There's two things. One is why is it coming so late to us, which is the obvious one, and we're running around trying to get this dealt with in pressurised time. And the second thing is then, in terms of the EU directive, to outline to us what the EU directive means. Okay? Content enough? Read then. Right, move on to the next item. Is the consultation on the agenda item number 10, the Financial Capability Strategy for Northern Ireland. Papers of this are at page 76. And we have a Financial Capability Strategy for Northern Ireland. If members are content to receive a summary of consultation responses. Read?
Read, yeah.
Now, agenda item number 11, which is written briefing from DETI, that's at page 192, in regard to the further scrutiny of PPEs, Intertrade Ireland's Acumen programme, February 2011. We have this page 192, we have a briefing paper from the department. If members have any comments on this, I have to say I'm well pleased with the performance and their targets and targets being exceeded. I think maybe in all key areas of performance they are on target, and in 4 out of the 5 they've exceeded their targets well there. So that's good to see.
Was there any reason to request the written briefing? No. Was there something that showed up in the PPE spreadsheet?
No.
From the top of my head, I think it was from the PPEs. It was ones that hadn't been completed yet, so members took an interest in this particular one and asked for further detail on.
Okay. So, content to note?
Yeah.
Next item, agenda item number 12, written briefing from Delhi Better Regulation Annual Report 2012-13. We have this at page 202. Have members any comments? If not, are we content to note? Agreed. Correspondence, then we move on to correspondence, which is at page 239. Jim, do you want to take us quickly through the correspondence here, please?
Mr. Chair, the first thing is from the Committee for Finance and Personnel regarding its inquiry into flexible working in the public sector. That's at page 240. If members are content to ask the Department to respond directly to the Committee for Finance and Personnel and copy the response to this committee.
Great.
From the Committee for OFMDFM concerning the Executive European Priorities 2013-14, it's a mid-year progress report. So unless members have any comments, if they're content to note that.
Well, I had only one comment, and well, it's not one comment. Reading through it, just reading there about the Office of Northern Ireland European Bureau that they've masterminded and arranged several assembly committee programmes. So, interesting use of the phrase. But at page 9 there, some of the minor concerns. The Erasmus programme shows an increase of 7.07, which is above the UK average of 3.36. Given that we have, whenever we heard there, the number of people not in employment, we have a higher level of students, much higher level percentage-wise of students. It'd be interesting to see how that reflects across. As a comment, by the way, I don't know whether we can establish further detail on that or they haven't done anything about this. And it's interesting as well that page 11, Dale is referring to STEM places and the likes, and I'm not so sure where that's fitting in with European priorities. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. A lot of this appears to be stuff that you'd expect to be done anyway. Does any member have anything further to note on this? Just on that, Jim, I know I've spoken to Minister Jennifer McCann around the issues that we were having with trying to actually get access to a briefing from the desk in Brussels around issues which were relevant to this committee. Have we anything further on that to report, just?
From the desk officer in Brussels, no, Chair, nothing is...
Could we maybe just get an update on that? I did mention it to the Minister, and she said one of her officials should be getting back in touch with us. So if we could follow through on that, please, to the department. Okay, thank you.
To OFM DFM?
Yes, and it was Minister Jennifer McCann that I had spoken to about a couple of times on it. Okay, Jim, do you want to continue then?
Sure. Invitation from the University of Ulster and Action Renewables to the launch of the Renewable Energy Consultancy Service Common Tower. So page 275.
I can't make it.
Right, so you're attending that, are you?
Oh, I can't go.
You can't go, no. Nor can I. So we just, unless anybody else is interested in that. That's an Enniskillen, isn't it, Jim?
Yeah.
When is it on?
12th
Next
of March.
Wednesday
12th of
morning.
March.
March.
Well, anybody
March?
wishing
Oh, well,
to
it's
go-
March. I'll go then. I thought it was next week.
Right. Anybody wishing to go, if they just connect with the committee staff here, okay? Right, Jim?
From the Open University inviting the chair to a degree ceremony. That's at page 276.
Yes.
So I...
No can do. That's the Saturday before the local government elections and all other elections, so don't think any of us will be.
I'll be looking for a day to get out, dressed up and get out from it.
Not a bit of it.
So from the Committee for Agriculture and Rural Development, providing a copy of correspondence sent to the Department regarding the Rural Broadband Infrastructure Programme at page 278.
Okay, noted.
So maybe if members want to consider the Department's response when it issues.
Okay, agreed then.
Okay.
And from the Minister to the Chair regarding sustainable energy legislative priorities for 2014 at page 280.
Okay, noted.
Patsy, I'd be worried about that, because the team in energy within DETI seems to be very, very small, but it's a very broad and complex area, and I think it's an area that ought be expanded or looked at. If you look at the resources the department have to do with energy issues, it seems very, very small. So can we ask the department if they've given any consideration to increasing the personnel within the energy division?
I know nothing about how many they've got.
6.
We could maybe. Many?
6.
6?
Yeah. I
Right.
think it's 6.
Given
That rings a bell.
the legislative priorities. Okay, great. Right.
Have you someone
Agenda
in
item
mind, Phil?
number
Have
14.
you someone
then.
in mind?
I'd be looking to get rid of myself out of here,
Apologies.
Okay, sure. Forward work programme. We have a draft forward work programme. The following oral briefings are scheduled: the Northern Ireland Science Park at next week's meeting, DETI on Credit Union and Industrial and Provident Society till the 27th of February, Irish League of Credit Unions and Ulster Federation of Credit Unions, the same topic. That's provisionally for the 13th of March. Newry and Mourne Enterprise Agency, a visit on the 6th of March, and to inform members, the committee office is working to schedule briefings from the utility regulator on the final competition commissioner price determination, which is due at the end of February. DETI on the growth loan fund, and obviously we've added to that list now today. Northern Ireland Tourist Board and Tourism Ireland to give us an update, and tabled today as a correspondence from the utility regulator regarding the consultation on SEM high-level design options, along with non-technical summary of the options consultation paper. So, if members are content to schedule an oral briefing from the utility regulator on the matter, and there may well be other items to be included in that agenda as well. Agreed?
What's any update on the proposed trade mission?
I've nothing on it. I don't think so, Jim, is there? No?
I have been talking to Invest and they're going to send a proposal in writing to the committee.
Right, okay. We'll wait on that. Now, at this point, I was going to invite Gordon to speak regarding a suggested itinerary for the committee visit to North Down the 3rd of April, but we'll...
For you, Gordon?
You're going to do it, Paul.
No, I know nothing about North.
I'm going to do a hairbrush like today.
Right. So, anyway, we'll park that one until he's here, okay? Content then with the forward work programme. Great, good. Now, any other items of business before we move to our next No? Okay. Next, date, time and place, next meeting is Thursday, the 13th of February at the Northern Ireland Science Park at 10 a.m. Okay, right.
30. This is the Northern Ireland